Welcome back, everybody, to the Gentleman's Wrestling Podcast. Joining me once again, as is tradition, when we talk about the Wrestling Observer Newsletter Hall of Fame. I think, what is this, year 3 or year 4 of us doing this together, Adam?
Yeah,
It's Adam Berger.
yeah. Thanks for having me, Jesse. It's at least year three. At least year three.
Yeah. And kind of because it's year 3, and because I feel like we have probably talked about most of the people that are on this ballot before, with the exception of the new names that are on the ballot. What I wanted to do for this episode was really focus on the new names to the ballot and then also focus on maybe some of the modern contemporary candidates whose cases have changed over the last year since we last discussed this. Because I don't know about you, Adam, like my opinion on the Steiners has not changed from where it was last year. My opinion on the Iron Sheik has not changed. My opinion on who's someone from Japan, Miko Satomura, who is technically still active, has not changed. Um, but I don't have. Do you have anyone like from the Let's start with the historical real quick. Do you have anyone from the historical performers era that you have changed opinion on from last year?
Oh yeah, I get a lot of thoughts on Bullet Bob Armstrong. I'm joking. I do not have any
See, because
thoughts
I was
on
gonna like,
Bullet Bob
there has
Armstrong.
been some
Uh,
healthy Bullet Bob Armstrong discussion going on in the Wrestling Observer Newsletter Hall of Fame channel on the Voices of Wrestling Discord, so I wasn't 100% uh, in on the bit there.
yeah, no. So there's only one new candidate in historical. So that's a relatively stable category from year to year. Obviously, Sergeant Slaughter went in last year, which was kind of the big change. So
Yeah,
yeah,
to be
not a whole lot new.
yeah, to be honest, for me personally, like a lot for I can't even remember. This might be year 5 of me voting or something like that. A lot of these are just it's the same names every year. There's been a couple people who have died, like the Iron Sheik, who have found their way onto the ballot. There are the kind of the tag teams that Davis kicked onto the ballot in recent years, like the British Bulldogs, the Heart Foundation. But a lot of these are the same names. You know, it's Pampero Firpo, it's Cowboy Bob Ellis, it's JYD, it's June Byers. It's a lot of the same people. So my opinions haven't really changed that much. Um, I will say my voting philosophy has gotten a little bit looser with this category, where there's really one name in particular, like I'm really adamant on getting in, and that's Johnny Rougeau. But I have tossed some votes around just to keep people on the ballot, people that I kind of see arguments for. I voted for Wild Bull Curry the last few years. I voted for June Byers before. I think I voted for JYD last year. Um, but I don't really feel super strongly about anyone in this category besides Johnny Rougeau, who I've talked about a lot as just a drawing star. Is there anyone just real quick like you feel super duper strongly about? I think you're a big JYD booster, right?
Yeah, I definitely feel strongly about JYD. So I actually use all my votes in this category. I know a lot of people don't use all their votes. I do, and I can get into why. Maybe we can do that probably more with modern, because I definitely have some macro thoughts on a lot of the Hall of Fame arguments that we see. But just to
Mhm.
run down kind of the historical category, Johnny Rougeau is the person I feel the strongest about. Um, there was an article a few years ago by I believe it was Pat LaPrade
Yeah.
on the Observer site, and when you read that, it's kind of hard to like have any sort of argument against him. He's someone who definitely needs to be included. Just both for his wrestling and promoting, and all the drawing he did in the um, Montreal, Quebec area. Incredibly impressive.
Yeah, he's the only one that I really feel like I've even heard like people be like just super adamant about getting in. I think with other strong candidates, I think we've seen gotten a lot of support, like JYD. I think everyone understands the argument both for and against JYD. I think I understand why Junkyard Dog has not been inducted into the Hall of Fame, as does all of his, supporters. Um, but with Johnny Rougeau, it really just seems to be people don't know who he is, and that's what's keeping him out. Because I really don't see any counter argument based on the criteria and based on what we know about his career, certainly from a drawing perspective. I mean, his work, I guess, is can be. There's not a ton of videotape about him. Um, he's a little bit his peak is really before a lot of even historians have been watching pro wrestling. Like his peak, we're really talking about like the 60s, probably as a worker. Um, but I really haven't seen a convincing non-argument for Johnny Rougeau. The only new people on this ballot are Afa and Sika Anawahi. Um, obviously, it was Afa who died, right?
I believe so. Yes.
Yeah. So like with a couple other people that have been added to this over the years, like the Iron Sheik, a death gets people talking a little bit more about their careers, and obviously that happened. I feel like Afa and Sika are probably most widely known as the forefathers of the Anawahi wrestling family, and kind of just how, and obviously even to even by and especially today, how many members of that family have contributed to the pro wrestling space, and that you could say makes them a historically significant team, which is like, if these guys never got involved in pro wrestling, would we have some of the wrestling stars that we have today? We would still have The Rock, theoretically, because The Rock is not directly related to the Anawahis, and he's also the son of Rocky Johnson. So you can't really make the argument that the Afa and Sika played a role in The Rock getting into pro wrestling. But pretty much everyone else that's in that family tree, they have a direct hand in putting in.
Yeah, that's definitely an interesting part of their, historical significance for sure. And also, correction, they both passed away this past year,
That's
within a
right.
few
One of them
months of each
died
other.
at the beginning of the year, I think, right?
I'm not sure exactly. Yeah, it looks like it was June and no, June and August. So just not too long ago and not too far apart. That's both sad and kind of romantic
Mhm.
at the same time.
Yes, I think all of us who are twins are afraid of that happening to us. Um, uh, so anyway, I mean, I don't really have like super strong feelings on them as a tag team, as candidates. I've never thought of them as serious candidates for the Wrestling Observer Newsletter Hall of Fame. Um, I think they were, as performers, I think they were good in their time for their they were good in their role, which was a specific role that existed well in for its time period, which were really like racially stereotypical um wrestling characters that did get over in a lot of the places that they worked. Um depending on where they were, like especially like I think in like San Francisco, you can make the case that they were real headliners. Other times they were more in the mid card. Um I don't have like I don't see them, cracking really even I would be surprised if they get the 10%. Um but do you have any feelings on the Wild Samoans as a tag team?
I don't have any strong feelings on them. I agree. I think they're probably, you'd have to feel really strongly, I think, about their historical significance. I guess in like kind of like a Stu Hart way. Although he was a promoter too, but it's something like that. I think because just based purely on their careers, just looking at who else is in the category, like I mean, like as a tag team, like Ricky Steamboat and Jay Youngblood are on it, are on the ballot, and they were very highly regarded as a working tag team, and strong draws too for the time they were together. And then you also have the British Bulldogs, incredibly innovative and just saying absolutely incredible workers, incredibly influential as well. And then you have the Von Erichs, from a drawing standpoint, um, and very historically significant themselves. Still having movies made about them 40 years later.
Mhm.
So there's just it was just tough for me to see them being one of like the top seven choices within that region.
Yeah, I would say like when they first started out in San Francisco, and they really did a lot of work in Texas, I think too. They were I'm not like the perfect person to talk about like Roy Shire's territory, but they were around as I would say, like, occasional main event workers. And, by the time they got to when they really probably did the most of their work, which would be, like, when they were in the WWF in, like, the first half of the 1980s, I don't really think that they were, like, main event draws. They were more just a tag team that they won the titles, they would feud with, like Ivan Putski and, like, Tito Santana or people like that, but not really what I would consider to be, like, a top tag team, either in work or in their placement on the card. Um, I think they had a long feud with, like, Chief J Strongbow and Jewel Strongbow in, like, 1982 or something like that. It the they're memorable characters for sure.
Mhm.
I do think, like, if they didn't have such a strong family legacy, like, would people think about them at all today? Um, and I would say the answer is probably no.
Yeah, I mean, certainly memorable characters, but I don't think they'd get the consideration of like being on the ballot if they didn't have that.
Yeah, like Chief J Strongbow is, like, a really notable character. He's kind of really before the Wild Samoans, certainly in the WWF, and he was certainly really popular, like, as, like, a babyface mid-carder in, like, the Bruno Sammartino days. But, like, I don't think anyone's having a serious conversation about Chief J Strongbow in the rest in as a Wrestling Observer Newsletter Hall of Famer. And I feel like the Wild Samoans are kind of, like, in his category in terms of being, like, kind of a memorable gimmick, not really particularly notable as workers or anything like that. So I think, and this is a tough category to get into for what you said. Like, we're looking at votes, like you mentioned, like Jay Youngblood and Ricky Steamboat, um, the Hart Foundation, like, as draws, like, someone might totally be able to prove me wrong on this, but I imagine, like, as drawing cards, like the Wild Samoans and Hart Foundation, the Bret Hart and Jim Neidhart team are probably similar in how they were slotted on cards. WWF was obviously, like, very successful in the late 80s. Um, but, like, both groups were kind of like, they could work a main event on, like, the B or C house show tour. Maybe they would, like, main event, like, some sort of television event, but not really main event worker level acts. But obviously, I think the Hart Foundation would be much more highly regarded as an individual, as a working team, as performers than the Wild Samoans would.
Yeah, for sure. And then like I didn't even mention like Mad Dog and Butcher Vachon, who I mean they only got 11% last year, but they have a really strong
Mhm.
drawing record
Yeah, like legit
for
main
the time
event.
they were together. Oh yeah,
Yeah, like legit main event. Even like Dusty Rhodes and Dick Murdoch. People talk about like Gordon and Goliath. I don't really know that much about them, but what I've read about them so far is that they're a pretty big drawing tag team during their time period, especially when they came to Los Angeles. So I just think it's a
well
tough.
regarded workers too. Yeah,
Yeah,
really.
yeah. I don't really see them hitting. I think like I said, like I think historical significance is probably their biggest category, and I don't really know if like getting a bunch of people involved in wrestling is really like enough to get you in. Like I believe there's only one trainer in the Wrestling Observer Newsletter Hall of Fame. It's Diablo Velasco is, I think, his name.
I
Um
believe that's correct. Yeah,
and he, he
yeah.
and he like his like list of people he's trained is like insanely long. It's like every notable lucha guy ever, basically. So standard like for training is really high, and I just don't think offense you could hit that. So that's kind of it for the historical perspective. We got a lot to cover here in the modern US, so that's what we're going to spend a bulk of this show on. So we'll start with going through. I almost want to go through every single person in this category because we have a lot of new names on here, and we also have names that have uh whose careers have evolved over the last year. There's a couple names here that I think are really key. People that haven't gotten a chance to get on the ballot before. But have so we're gonna run. I'm gonna run down the list. Like let's start. Do you have any? So first time candidate Asuka. What are your thoughts on Asuka? I think her. I'm not super familiar with her work as Kana in Japan as like a worker. I'm hard pressed to think that she is um, a good enough worker to crack the Hall of Fame as a pure work candidate. I guess you could say that she had some success as in historical significance as being a prominent women's wrestler during a time period where the status of women's wrestling was really elevated in WWE, but I don't really see her as a serious candidate.
Yeah, I mean, I could see an argument if you like if you really love her work and think like she's a Hall of Fame level worker. Um, I think you'd be very hard pressed to say that that in and of itself would be worthy of getting in on its own or being, one of the top 7 people on this ballot. Yeah, she doesn't really headline. She never really headlined in WWE. She has a few main events. I think like she had the TLC main events in 2018 and 2019 with Becky Lynch and Charlotte Flair. And I think they did a triple threat one year, and then they had a tag team match the next year. And then like she does I don't know if it was headlining necessarily, but she did have like some high profile matches with Becky Lynch on pay-per-views. So, but it's not very many, right? It's like, less than a handful. So it would be very difficult to make even like a relative to era drawing case for her. And I don't think she's quite strong enough as a worker to get in on that alone. Definitely has, a number of great matches that I've seen over the years, and some great ones in Japan too. She had like those mixed tags against that mixed tag against Minoru Suzuki. That's kind of infamous for the level of violence within it, and some other ones too. So yeah, I mean, she's that. I mean, I don't have a problem with her being on the ballot. I could see like someone making a historical significance argument because as one of like the more successful Japanese imports in American wrestling. Shinsuke is probably the most successful, and you could say she's been number 2 maybe, at least in terms of like a long-term career, not like Giant Baba like
I was going to
touring
say, you
for a
better
year.
put some respect on Shohei Baba's 1964 run in the United States. He was
Great
headlining.
run.
He was headlining in Los Angeles. He was headlining the Garden. How dare you? Yeah, I mean, I think like the case, like you said, is like you would just have to like really, really, really be personally a huge fan of her in-ring work, and to me, that's a sign of a pretty weak candidate. Like, I'd vote for Nigel McGuinness if he comes back on the ballot, but I understand that he is not like going to get a lot of traction.
I don't think
But
he's ever been on, has he?
I guess he hasn't been. I read in the Observer today. It kind of seemed like he was on, and I'm trying to. I'm trying to like remember. Like maybe I just saw that he was on one year, or maybe I saw that Dave might have been considering him for putting him on the ballot. I don't know if he'd ever get on the ballot. And that you want to see some advocacy. Wait till if they put Nigel McGuinness back on the ballot. I'm gonna be like Elon Musk in Pennsylvania. Like I'm gonna be dedicating my entire life to getting him into the Hall of Fame. Um,
Okay.
yeah. What do you think her like? I was just kind of looking at this like. So her highest rated match on Cage Match in WWE is her match against Athena Ember Moon in 2017, which has an 8.79. She has higher matches, several higher matches in Japan. Those don't have a ton of votes. Um, and so like does have better matches in that one, but she's getting in largely because of the strength of her record in like US women's wrestling. I don't really think that she has like a huge catalog of amazing matches since coming to the United States.
Yeah, I remember that Ember Moon one. That is a great match, but also didn't she win and then leave the brand? I think that was always a funny. I always thought that was funny. She just beat everyone and left, and they vacated the
Yes,
title.
and
Um,
her undefeated gimmick got over, but then they got mad because it was too hard to book around, so they just had her lose for kind of
even though
no.
they, yeah, she lost to Charlotte at WrestleMania, right? Even though they had Ronda Rousey coming in, and like they could have just like done Rousey versus Asuka for SummerSlam that year, and it would have been huge. But
Yeah.
oh God. Anyway,
Not the last time we'll talk about some inane Vince McMahon booking on the show, I'm sure. Moving on, Mark and Jay Briscoe, I guess not active in terms of as a tag team, which is how they're being considered, but obviously Mark Briscoe is still active. I definitely feel like they are almost, there was obviously the Jay's death, got them on the ballot. But at least in our circles, I feel like there's more momentum for the Briscoes. They're building momentum. I think my argument for the Briscoes would be a fundamental change in the way the voting body feels about the Hall of Fame and what they consider to be acts that are worthy to be in the Hall of Fame. Because I think from a work perspective, the Briscoes should be in. It comes down to whether you think working in Ring of Honor was prominent enough to warrant consideration for the Hall of Fame, which a lot of voters historically have said no, is not.
Yeah, I don't know. I have mixed feelings about the Briscoes. I voted for them last year. I do really like them. They're definitely Hall of Fame. Like their work is Hall of Fame worthy for sure, and they have a lot of longevity, which is unique for a tag team. I guess the what gives me pause with the Briscoes is I'll put it this way. Like the mid 2000s to early 2010s, they have like an incredibly strong run. And then their, last year they were active, they have that incredibly strong run with FTR. Those middle years, though, I don't think they're necessarily as strong as people like the beginning and the end of their time together was, because Jay, becomes a singles wrestler for some of those years. So the tag team's more in the background. They still tag somewhat regularly, but it's more of, just, Jay having his singles feuds. And then because they never like really left Ring of Honor or went anywhere else until AEW purchased it, they because they were just always there, they kind of got pushed into the background a bit. Now they did have a lot of great matches with, the Young Bucks and Fish and O'Reilly and the Motor City Machine Guns and I think Kazarian and Daniels and a bunch of other teams that were in Ring of Honor around that time. But a lot of that I don't think necessarily resonated nearly as much as the work that they did both before and after that. So yeah, I like them a lot. But there's a lot of like great candidates on this ballot and really strong candidates. So yeah, I don't know if I'm going to vote for. I'm still trying to figure out my ballot a little bit. So I think our discussions today will be helpful. But they would probably be like they're on the borderline for me. They might end up being my first cut, unfortunately.
Yes, and there's 7 votes you can have in this category. This is I think a bloated category. I wouldn't necessarily say it's like loaded. It just has so many people on here. I think it's going to be actually really difficult for some people to get in this year. Maybe I'll be proven wrong. I know there's a couple candidates here where people seem to feel pretty confident this is the year they're getting in. I just think there's a lot of people on here that are going to suck up different votes, and I know you get more votes because there's more people in the category. I just think it's going to be tough for like a team like the Briscoes to really gain any momentum. Even if I feel like things are turning in their favor. It's also um, been historically extremely difficult for tag teams to make the Hall of Fame. Up until a few years ago, there was really only a handful of tag teams in the history of wrestling in the Hall of Fame. It was like the Fabulous Kangaroos and the Road Warriors and like the Dusek Family Riot Squad, like a couple like pioneering teams. And then it was like, it took the Rock and Roll Express, I think, a number of ballots to get in, and they're the Rock and Roll Express. Um, there's several tag teams on this ballot this year. There's obviously the historical tag teams that Dave has been adding with that contain one Hall of Fame member and not the other, which, as everyone knows, I'm philosophically opposed to. It's really going to be really difficult, I think, for tag teams to get in. But if you feel like tag teams are underrepresented, if you feel like really modern wrestling is underrepresented in the Hall of Fame, I feel like that is a huge case for voting for the Briscoes, because Kevin Hare wrote a really good article in Voice of Wrestling that went up, I believe, yesterday from when we're recording this, on kind of the evolving nature of how we view the Hall of Fame. And he said something really shocking to me, which is that every modern and US candidate that has been elected to the Observer Hall of Fame has spent at least some time in WWE. And that's kind of shocking to me in terms of like WWE is seen as like a prerequisite for getting into the Hall of Fame. And I feel like the reason is because people don't value a team like the Briscoes working in Ring of Honor the way they would value it if they were working somewhere like WWE, because there'd be more fans there. And it kind of has nothing to do with Mark and Jay Briscoe as draws and everything to do with like you got to work for a big major league brand to in order for you to get
So
in.
okay, so I have 2 points. When I said I had a macro point I wanted to
Yes.
make. So I'm writing something currently. I hardly ever write, but my fingers apparently still work because I got inspired by Kevin's column to finally
Mhm.
finish something I've been working on for a while. So there's two kind of points I want to make. One's just about like modern wrestling in general and its representation into the Hall of Fame. So I'm working on kind of showing like how many Hall of Famers there are from different eras throughout the U.S. And I'm trying to figure out like, okay, what like how many people are in from different generations. It's tough to define generations within
Mhm.
wrestling, obviously, because there's so much overlap. So what I decided to do was just say, all right, like I'm just going to pick like milestone years. It's going to be 2025 next year, right? So,
Mhm.
okay, who's in the Hall of Fame that was aged between 25 and 45 in like a year that ends in 5, right? So, if I do that for 19, and obviously some guys are going to be in multiple, like it's a rolling window. So some guys
Yeah.
are based on their age are going to be in multiple buckets that you're going to see here, right? So 1955, 28 inductees. This is just for US and Canada, right? And just wrestlers specifically. So 1955, 28. 1965, 30. 1975, 30. 1985, 27. 1995, 21. 2005, 16. 2015, 7. 2025 is next year. Guess how many there would be?
Across this is all categories.
This is just US. This is just US.
Oh, just US.
Yeah. Yeah, all these numbers have just been
Yeah.
modern US. Yeah.
Is it zero?
It's one, and it's Brian Danielson,
Okay,
who
yeah,
just
because I was thinking
retired.
I was thinking Okada. I'm like Okada. Okay, so Okada, like Naito, like there's more movement in Japan, right?
Yes, yeah, it's more Japan. So this
Yeah.
was more me just talking. So all those numbers that I just gave are just about the U.S. Buckets. So in prior decades, like there's
So
been
AJ Styles doesn't fall into that category.
AJ Styles turned 35 in, I believe it was 2012. So he'll be
Okay.
older than 45 by
Okay. Yeah.
next year.
He'd be in the
Um,
2015 bucket. Okay.
Yeah, but he'd be in 2015 and 2005 because
Yeah.
he was over than 25 then.
Mhm.
So, but really, it's just the problem is like in terms of guys who became eligible for the Hall of Fame, like over the past 15 years or so, it's John Cena, Brock Lesnar, AJ Styles, and Brian Danielson. Like that's it. There's only 4 inductees that didn't have anything to do with the Attitude Era, which is insane because the Attitude Era has been over for over 20 years. So there
Yes.
just needs to be some, I think, there, and I have an illustration for you, which I know you'll appreciate because you're a basketball fan. So do you know who the NBA's all-time leading rebounders are?
Well, of course, they're Wilt Chamberlain and Bill Russell.
Yes, they are. Do you know how many rebounds they both have? Like
I think Wilt Chamberlain has.
estimated?
I think Wilt Chamberlain has about 24,000 rebounds, and I believe Bill Russell has about 22,000 rebounds.
Yeah, that's right. That's right. Do you know who's third and how many rebounds they have?
I want to say Kareem Abdul-Jabbar is third. Is that right?
He is, yes, but he only has 17,000.
17,000. Yes.
And then if you think about like great rebounders from the recent decades, like Kevin Garnett and Dwight Howard, who won like, 4 or 5 rebounding titles for having the
Mm.
most rebounds in a season, for their careers, they only have around 14,000, right? So now you can wonder why. Okay, so why is that? Did Wilt and Russell just play a ton more games? Well, no. Like those other guys actually played a lot longer than they did. So Okay, why did they have so many more rebounds? Well, it's because when KG and Dwight played, they had like teams put up about like 80 shots a game. And then when Russell and Chamberlain played, teams were putting up like 110 shots a game and shot at lower percentages.
Right.
So
They would
they
shoot
had so
like,
many more, yeah, they had
yeah,
so many more rebounds because there were so many more rebounds available for them to get. So when we talk about drawing in the United States, like all these Hall of Famers from prior decades, especially in the territory era, like, yeah, they have much stronger drawing cases than a lot of the modern candidates because they actually had places they could go to work and draw. So, like, it's just penalizing the modern generation for something that is completely out of their control. So, just like when you're analyzing like sports cases, like the people on the Hall of Fame ballots and different, different Hall of Fames, they're competing with their contemporaries. They're not competing with people from 40 years ago. So
mhm.
I think we just need to start looking at the modern candidates within the context of the modern wrestling industry.
Right, and I think that's really important because I think it's kind of funny because I was mentioning this yesterday. Like we both said like, oh, we think Johnny Rougeau should totally be in the Hall of Fame, and a lot of that is because like it's way easier to build a case for Johnny Rougeau because of the era that he was working in. We could point to, oh, look, he drew this big crowd. Oh, look, he drew this big crowd. Oh, they did this program with Andre the Giant, and all this stuff comes in and he drew really big at different periods because it's not just because like in the territory area or the territory era there was more places where you could go and draw big. The business was so much more volatile in terms of trends, and like you could just have a hot angle and all of a sudden you could go from drawing 4,000 people to 8,000 people like one week to the next. And on the flip side, if you bombed, you would go from drawing 8,000 to 4,000 people on a week to week basis. That just doesn't happen anymore. We've seen it with like AEW and WWE. Even though we've seen like WWE's business, creep up, it took kind of years of the business to kind of creep back upwards to where it has been for WWE today, as opposed to um like, oh, they just had like one good angle and then all of a sudden they went from drawing 5,000 fans to 13,000 fans. It's The business is not nearly as volatile, which makes it much harder to make individual cases for drawing. It's easy to go like, oh, then Dusty Rhodes went to Florida and popped that territory. Like, there's no such thing as popping a territory really anymore. Um, I guess you could say the case like there was a clear. I think like when CM Punk came back to AEW, that was a clear incident of one guy coming back and clearly like popping a territory. But that's like a one in like that never happens anymore. Just because
Yeah,
the way the business is so different. And like it's easier to build a drawing case for someone like Johnny Rougeau than it is for somebody like Samoa Joe or even somebody like Edge. And we have way more data about what Samoa Joe did, what Edge did as individual draws. But because of the era of business that they were in, that data is way less, it's way more difficult to build a case with that data as it is with even the more limited data that we have from guys from the territory era.
yeah. My illustration for that would be it's a lot easier to change the direction of a sailboat than it is a cruise ship. And that's what like WWE is. Like it like you said, like they don't have to worry about like one bad angle like sinking them, but it also is it's difficult and it takes time for them to heat up as well, and for
And
like one individual wrestler to make a difference.
in like a lot of cases, it seems almost beyond like bookers and wrestlers' control. Like you can have a good angle, and it's like it's not going to necessarily pop the territory the way it would be if you're like, hey, we're bringing in like Mil Mascaras for a show on like if you're like a Texas promotion and you go from drawing 5,000 fans one night to 12,000 fans the next night. Like it's such a different business, and I think that in the data that you just talked about, the lack of modern candidates getting in makes it so much more difficult. um
Well, one point I wanted to make with that though, like when we're talking about draws, like if you look at draws relative to era though, like okay, so we just like as I mentioned before, like in those different decades, right? there's like 30 Hall of Famers, like 30 different guys in from those decades. So someone might be a draw that like pops the territory, right? But if you were just to rank them like within the entire region or like the entire US, like they're not necessarily, even like someone who's in the Hall of Fame, they're not necessarily going to be like in the top 10, right, for that era.
Uh-huh.
Whereas if you look at like a modern era in WWE, and I know this might actually like, be complimentary to Edge and Randy Orton, which a lot of people might not like to hear, but just their ability to like hold business steady or just pop it intermittently in terms of contributing that, like has them like on a relative basis, they rank much higher within their era than maybe some Hall of Famers that have more traditional clear cut drawing cases would in
Yes.
theirs.
This is like how like people can argue that like Kane was a bigger draw than Dusty Rhodes.
Okay, I'm not going to go that far, but
But I'm using
I
that
get what
as
you're
just
saying.
as exaggerated example in terms of like if someone has just worked on top and worked a lot of main events in WWE, even if they weren't necessarily like a huge individual draw, the weight of their accomplishment and because of the era and because of the business realities of where they worked and the way that wrestling has changed, they are going to wrestle far more shows in front of 10,000 fans. If you want to use like the standard that Matt Farmer has used to calculate
Yes.
drawing power, than like many other people who people would consider all time like legendary wrestlers, even if they're not particularly good. Like you can, we'll talk about Roman Reigns later, but like Roman Reigns is, I think, drawn, he's headlined more stadium shows or more shows that drew more than 50,000 people than like any other wrestler in history. And that, okay, you can maybe give him credit for like the last few WrestleManias, but like those included WrestleMania shows that were like seen as like big disappointments.
Yeah, with I don't know if you want to get into that now, but
No,
I
we'll
would
talk about him
say
later. Um,
okay. All right, we'll circle back to that one.
yeah, let's move on. The Young Bucks, I I'm a huge Young Bucks supporter and voter. I think it's ridiculous that they didn't get in on the first ballot. They have been active this year. I don't really think their career has changed at all in terms of what their candidacy is like. Although I do think that they could win another Tag Team of the Year award at the end of the year. Because I do think that they have put together a really strong last couple of months in terms of in-ring work after kind of being on autopilot and being part of a stupid angle at the start of the year. But like, do you think like nothing for you has really changed with the Young Bucks, right?
Well, they did have that. I mean, it was primarily generated by Sting, but Sting's last show did a giant buy rate for AEW. I want to say it was
True.
like its second or third. I think it was its third biggest buy
Mhm.
rate ever, behind Punk's first match and All In last year, which is incredible. And that match is going to be probably get pretty high on match of the year voting as well. So rest of the year very uneven, but I mean that's a giant success.
I
So at
don't know.
least
It's
they
a
have
good.
something
It's a
there.
like I said, like it's kind of like a down year for the Young Bucks. But they still had that Sting match, and that was a hugely successful program. And obviously, I think like the I guess I'd call like inorganic interest in like this is Sting's last match. Like you can't repeat that really anytime ever. But the Young Bucks played a pivotal role, I think, in making it a real angle for uh people to want to see, and B, like making that match as good as it was. I mean, that's the reason that the match is going to win match of the year is like, yeah, it had this natural drama of Sting having a last match, but the match is like really incredible.
Oh yeah, it was. So actually, on the Young Bucks, just throwing some stuff out there. As part of my prep for this year and looking at modern, I looked at like okay, how many 4-star matches did Dave give them, and then how many matches did they have like rated over 8, or did candidates have rated over 8 and over 9 as well? And I put a
Mhm.
filter for like 15 votes or something, just so, like there's not like one weird person who loves
Yeah.
something strange. But so the Young Bucks have 162 4-star matches from Dave, which is a lot.
Yeah.
But then Cage Match over 8 has them at 115 with at least 15 votes. And then over 9, they have 23. So it's not just Dave. Like a lot of people think they're absolutely incredible. because those are absurdly high numbers.
Yeah,
So
those are like
yeah,
Brian Danielson level numbers.
yeah, like they're, I don't know. I mean, we talked about them last year. Like it's just from, and also I will say another thing that changed in front from their case, like AEW getting that massive TV deal that makes it, like what the second most profitable wrestling promotion to ever exist, or
Yeah,
at
but the
least
people who aren't voting for the Young Bucks don't care about that. Or they'll point to like sagging, business metrics now and say like, well, they're killing their promotion. They don't like the people that didn't vote for the Young Bucks don't respect the fact that they started AEW and were successful draws. So like I don't think more evidence is really going to change that. I understand the point you're making. Um, but like if we're talking about like Young Bucks as draws, like they created a whole other new wrestling company. They created it. Like I don't care about like obviously Tony had the money and is the key player as well. But like people talk about, oh, Cody helped create it, Jericho helped create it. Kenny Omega, no, it's the Young Bucks starting out in the indies, helping popularize the Bullet Club in America. They created AEW and they don't get enough credit. They should get more credit. I know like they do get a lot of credit, but honestly, like I feel like their credit is being undervalued when people talk about other people. Like Cody might have died on the indies if it wasn't for the Young Bucks.
he wouldn't have died, but
But he
like
wouldn't have
I
been
think
nearly as successful, and he wouldn't be where he
oh
is today if the Young Bucks didn't give him the Bullet Club branding, help him be like, more cool, I guess, to the indie fans
You
than
are
if
you
he
are
was.
100%. Yeah, you're 100% correct about that, and we know because he went to TNA for Bound for Glory immediately after he left WWE,
Mhm.
and like that didn't really do
Yeah,
anything.
he would be like, I mean, he's more talented than this guy, but he'd be kind of like what Nick Nemeth is, where he'd be like, oh, it's like kind of cool we're seeing him outside of WWE. Um, and it wasn't like he was really highly like anticipated to see him outside of WWE, I think.
He was, yeah, I mean he was definitely an indie draw, but I mean it's I think what the Young Bucks get, I don't think people understand how critical they were to Bullet Club becoming and New Japan becoming
Yep,
popular in the
absolutely.
US, because they they were the only act that was working Ring of Honor regularly. So they were really the bridge between New Japan and Ring of Honor outside the Global Wars show that they would do, or series of shows that they would do once a year in the summer. Outside of that, it was really just the Young Bucks going back and forth, and also they're being the elite. I mean, they were the first pro wrestling act to figure out like, oh, hey, YouTube is an incredible marketing tool. Like, All In selling out instantly when the only way place that was promoted was like on YouTube and their social media. Like no one else promoted that, and it sold
Mhm.
out instantaneously. Like 10,000 seats. Like which is just people were before that happened. Like people were worried. They were like, oh, I don't know how this show's gonna do. I hope they can pull it off because like when New Japan would do shows with Ring of Honor, like I don't know, maybe they got to like 5,000 for some of
Yeah,
them,
there's
but
yeah.
actually, I don't even think they got to that. It might have only been, maybe they did, but it
Yeah,
would
there
have been
was the
like,
New Orleans like show with Kenny versus Cody Rhodes.
okay, oh yeah, that's WrestleMania weekend though. So
Yeah,
like that's not even, so like just when like New Japan would come over though, they were probably only doing like, 3,000,
yeah.
around in those years. So yeah, but yeah, the New Japan, like the Cody Omega match, but again, they promoted that on BTE. That was something they promoted on BTE more than on Ring of Honor television.
Yeah.
So
I think
it
this is something like that's we're now starting to see this kind of get lost over time. Like AEW's been around for 5 years now. Like it's been 10 years really since like the Young Bucks really started to take off. Probably even longer than that. Um, like they were like this was an era where like WWE was incredibly uncool. Um, I guess they're cool now to some people. They're still uncool to me. But like they made wrestling cool for like people my age, like people who were in college and were still pro wrestling fans. Like John Cena wasn't cool. Um, you know, Seth Rollins wasn't cool. Like the Young Bucks and the popularization of Bullet Club in the US, like that made pro wrestling something cool for people like me to keep watching. And I don't know if like I would still be a huge wrestling fan if it wasn't for that, to be honest. Like It is an extremely important time in wrestling. And I know like it's my adolescence, so of course I think it's really important, like everyone does. But I think over time we're starting to lose that perspective on like just how important they were, not only as a great working team, not only as like a team that could draw, but just overall keeping pro wrestling like alive in this country during a time where WWE was so bad at servicing its own fan base.
Yeah, no, agree. We definitely talked about a lot of that last year, but I will just add that, AEW securing its future and its place in history, over the last year is, I mean, that if there was any doubt before, which I didn't have any, and I don't think anyone else should either, like there really shouldn't be any now. Like
Yeah,
they should go in this
yeah,
year.
like I think they're like I think they're probably the strongest. Realistically, I think they're the strongest candidate on the entire ballot. Um, and I think you could make a case that just like in all three of the main criteria, like they might have like individual like just in those criteria alone, they were so elite at that they could get in. Like if they were just on work, you can make a case that they should just be in. I think that's probably their strongest one. Just on drawing, you look at what they've done, where they started, what they were able to do, they would have a case. And historical significance, it might still be a little bit too early for the historical significance to really hit, but I think obviously they have extremely strong historical significance. Just the style of wrestling alone, they helped popularize the United States, really pushing that kind of style that they had in Dragon Gate and working like, crappy lucha indies in Southern California when they were teenagers. Like the pacing and the amount of moves that they were doing, like and how prevalent that has become across all of wrestling. Like I think they check all three of the main criteria, like at the highest level, pretty much. You could check it at. So I think it's to me it's ridiculous they're not in.
100% agree.
Adam Copeland slash Edge. He has done a lot over the last year, in terms of coming into AEW and working for AEW. Some would say that's kind of exposed that hasn't been really an individual draw the way we've seen some other ex WWE guys come into AEW and be able to draw. I think his work has been good. I did not vote. I have voted for him in the past. I did not vote for him last year. I don't think I'm going to vote for him this year. Do you feel like what he's done has really moved the needle at all in favor of him, or what?
I think it's helping people. I think it helps from his in-ring performance perspective. I do think like him still being really good at this
Yep, still has
age.
gas in the tank for sure, which was a kind of a question with because the way his character was in WWE started to become pretty ridiculous.
Yeah,
So
and I think that was more him just like I think in order like he's a very intelligent performer. And I think in WWE, especially that time period in WWE, like not a lot made sense. So he would just kind of get more and more outlandish, I think, to try to make sense out of things. And then in AEW, he has more input into his booking, and he can set up storylines that are a bit more logical and which grounds his character a lot, and then just improves his performance all around. So I think
mhm.
while his comeback probably hasn't helped him from people, considering him a draw, I think it's definitely helped improve his reputation as a performer.
Yeah, I've definitely got a more favorable view on him than I did at this time last year. We talked about this many times. I was really dubious of him being able to come into AEW just because I felt like he was obsessed with overacting in WWE, and I just really his character really started to bother me. And I'll give you credit. You were always like, "Oh, I think he'd be able to pivot, successfully into AEW. He'd recognize what would work." And I'm like, "Adam, his brain is mush. He can't do it." And you were right. He's been, able to pivot into a way where I think he's been a part of some really strong feuds in AEW. I don't know, like from a drawing perspective, it's really helped his case. But I definitely have a more positive opinion on him going forward. And we'll see what his career's not done. He's recovering from injury now. But he could still come back. He could still like Edge could still have a 5-star match between now and the end of his career. That wouldn't surprise me really at all. At
Yeah,
this point,
yeah.
like there's still
He,
tread on those tires.
Yeah, he definitely could. Like, you do worry, like, if this, if that big injury might kind of be it for him. But I don't know. He's proved people wrong before, so we'll see if he can do it again. And I'll say he's not someone I'll vote for this year. But now that I'm kind of doing more analysis about like the different eras and Hall of Fame representation, I think he's definitely someone I could potentially see myself voting for in the future.
Bill Goldberg, not technically retired. I believe it was his little appearance at Bad Blood. Was that like his only appearance over the past year?
Yeah, he hasn't. He doesn't have a match scheduled or anything, as far as I know. I mean,
So he's
maybe
not.
he'll end up having another one. I don't
Yeah,
know.
so he's not. Yeah, so they're really. I don't think this. I think we both have talked about Bill Goldberg a lot. I think everyone understands the strengths and weaknesses of the Bill Goldberg case. Um, so I'm just gonna move on from him. Samoa Joe. I want to tie this back into some of our conversation about the Briscoes, and so for me, Samoa Joe, I thought he was great this past year, especially, he got a world title run, which I don't think a lot of people saw coming between. So he had a world title run. I wouldn't say he drew huge as world champion, but he didn't perform poorly as world champion. Um, and I guess my general thought on Samoa Joe, and I did a lot of content on Samoa Joe. I had Garrett Kidney on a podcast where we talked a lot about his career. I wrote a couple articles about Samoa Joe earlier this year during his world title run, and it really hammered home something about the Hall of Fame that you kind of touched on earlier about the standards for contemporary wrestlers and why we're seeing such poor representation in the Hall of Fame. And I think like WWE's monopoly over wrestling and things like that. And I'm kind of drifting away from caring as much about the criteria, especially for modern candidates that I've seen in real time. Like the criteria to me is really helpful guidelines for evaluating cases, but I don't think it has to be the be all end all to Hall of Fame discussion. I've been here for Samoa Joe's career. I've seen it, firsthand. I've seen him live plenty of times. I watched his matches in real time. Like Samoa Joe is a great professional wrestler. Like he's good at basically everything that you would want to be a professional wrestler to be good at. And I think that person should kind of be in the Hall of Fame. Like Dave kind of made this argument for Minoru Suzuki, where like he saw Minoru Suzuki working in the United States, I think, or maybe it might have been in England, but he saw him working and like he just like instantly got over with the audience. And he said something like, it really just shows that Minoru Suzuki should be a Hall of Famer. I think this was before he was inducted into the Hall of Fame. And his point was like, this guy, he just can go over anywhere and he can go anywhere and he immediately gets over because he's just a great professional wrestler. And I feel that way about Samoa Joe. Like, could you say Samoa Joe as a worker is meets the criteria? It's probably his best case. In terms of the criteria would be for work. So you'd say, yeah, like drawing, not really. Does really have a drawing case? You'd have to really get into the context of the promotions he was working in. Um, historical significance, he's probably not that historically significant of a wrestler either. But I'm just here to tell you, I've seen Samoa Joe's entire career. I've been here for it. He's been an amazing professional wrestler for 20 years. There's a couple lean years in there, especially towards the end of the TNA run where he obviously wasn't as motivated. But whenever he's been given any opportunity to be good, I feel like he has been outstanding. And it's unfortunate that his career has coincided a lot with, you know, Vince McMahon and like Vince Russo running the two most powerful wrestling companies in the United States. Like that isn't Samoa Joe's fault. If we took Samoa Joe and put him in a time machine into the 70s or 80s and he could just go to different territories and work with all these different promoters, he would be, I feel like, a slam dunk Hall of Famer because he's an incredible professional wrestler who's in a lot of ways timeless. And I think he should be recognized. And I feel like that's a Hall of Famer. Like you can't convince me that a Hall of Fame would be less because Samoa Joe is in it. That it would be lowering the standard of the Hall of Fame if because a guy like Samoa Joe is in it. You will never be able to convince me of that. So I'm feeling really passionate about Samoa Joe, and I feel like I'll probably vote for him this year.
Well, let me take the criteria into consideration and I think maybe help you out a little bit with this. So he helps build Ring of Honor, for one. Number two, in TNA, I have him headlining or being a primary drawing card on 18 of their pay-per-views during his time there, which is probably more than people think. He set the record for TNA pay-per-view buy rates for at least one of his matches with Kurt Angle, if not two. I think Joe and Angle might have both of the, like, might be number one and number two in terms of most TNA pay-per-views ever sold. In WWE, he also headlined, I want to say about 6 months or so, in 2017 and 2018, feuds with Brock, Roman, and AJ Styles. And with Brock, he actually, like, this was the network era, and that Joe Brock match actually popped a pay-per-view buy rate like way more than what they normally did for the people that still bought pay-per-views back then.
And if I recall correctly, the Raws for that feud, actually, I remember like like this again in real time, like watching like the week to week, like seeing the Raw numbers, and like the Raw numbers went up during a time period where they did not go up all that often. And I remember using it as evidence to be like, look, Samoa Joe was a draw if just a little bit of competency is put behind him. And unfortunately, for such a large portion of his career, competency was not put behind him.
Yeah, no, 100% agree. And then, so that's from like, that's from a drawing perspective. So look, is that a traditional like Hall of Fame drawing case? No, but
not
at
by the
least in terms
standards. Yeah, not by the standards that have been
prior
used.
eras.
Yeah.
Yeah. But relative to like his era that he performed in, like, okay, he made it to the main event of TNA, he made it to the main event of WWE, and he made it to the main event of AEW and was successful in all three places. He headlined in Noah against Masawa. So, and actually, like this, who has a career like that? Especially
Vader.
like during this, yeah. But I just mean like, but especially like during the time he's been active, like nobody has a career like that. And then if you want to get into a work perspective, like, I mean, he had like 04 through 06 at least. He's arguably the best wrestler in the world for 3 years. He won in 05, he won Most Outstanding in the Observer Awards. And the only wrestlers who are eligible for the Hall of Fame to win Most Outstanding but aren't in yet, or like Will Ospreay's not eligible yet, but he's going to go in eventually, you'd think, right?
I'd hope so. I don't know. The Young Bucks are still waiting to get in. Like,
but the only wrestlers to win Most Outstanding that aren't in are Davey Richards, who, that was kind of a lean time for in-ring work. And he had one like great year in really great year in ROH.
But yeah, I mean, I want to point out, like, in his, like, Dave Richards was really great, like, in Ring of Honor. Like,
he was, but that was kind of a peak. Like, he was great for a long time, but in terms of like
certainly as a singles wrestler,
like, yes, but being considered like the best wrestler in the world, like, okay, there was a very brief time period, like he had like maybe 1 year where that was considered. Joe had at least 3 where he had a really strong case for that. And then the other one's Koji Kanemoto, who was a junior heavyweight in Japan for most of his career. So Joe, like, and I think that there's historical significance in that too. Like, if you're considered the best wrestler in the world for multiple years, like, that's significant. Like, no matter which way you cut it. Yeah, and it obviously meets the performance criteria as well.
If I were to talk about historical significance with Samoa Joe, I think like the main point I would point out is, like, I think along with CM Punk is that he really was a guy who helped put indie wrestling kind of on the map, because indie wrestling in the United States, like, existed throughout the 1990s, really, because after the territories dried up, there was a feeder system. It's where a lot of the guys from ECW, got started, but it was really lawless. It was hard for individuals to stand out. I think the infancy of the internet, as the internet became more ubiquitous, it became easier. But really, I feel like if we're doing this from a historical perspective, CM Punk and Samoa Joe, I think, are the two first indie wrestling stars, like guys who could come into a Ring of Honor or a IWA Mid South or one of these, indie wrestling companies of the time period, and people would be like, "Oh, I don't normally go to the show, but I'm going to go see it because they're bringing in Samoa Joe, they're bringing in CM Punk." Like maybe like Chris Hero or someone like that, but I do feel um like he really became a a national star on the indie scene and was one of the first people to really be doing that, and helped create and that helped obviously foster and create Ring of Honor and all of the other indie wrestling. And we're now looking at this Hall of Fame ballot. There's a lot of people that got their roots on the independent scene, so those guys who were kind of early-ish pioneers on the indie scene probably deserve a lot of historical significance credit.
Yeah, especially when, they went on to headline in the biggest promotions in the world, as well. Like, I think
Yeah,
that
but a lot
definitely
of
gives
guys
some
have done. Yeah, but
added
I guess
weight.
from a historical significant perspective, a lot of guys have gone on and headlined big shows, but guys who have really helped, I think, break out and start something, I think they
Yeah.
probably don't get enough credit for that.
Well, but they paved the way for like people to come after them. Like, because
Yeah,
before Punk, like WWE, like I think the only indie guy WWE hired was Paul London. Like, and they did not push Paul London at all.
yeah,
So
in terms of name, because people like Edge and Christian, they were working indies. The Hardys were working indies, a generation prior to that. But in terms of people having a national reputation on the indies, certainly CM Punk is a pioneer in that end.
yeah, and Joe went the TNA route, and they, to their credit, like his first year in the company is incredible. Like they pushed him really strong right away. And a natural promotion doing that for an indie guy was a little, unusual, for sure.
Yeah, and as you mentioned, he drew. They had the perfect guy for when they brought in Angle. They had the perfect guy for him to feud with. Um, he again, when anytime someone was able to put two and two together and actually push Samoa Joe, despite the fact that Samoa Joe, I think, is as I talked about this with my show with Garrett from earlier this year, Samoa Joe's the easiest wrestler in the world to book for. I think he's Samoa Joe. He comes out and he kills people, and then you build someone else up and they eventually beat him. It doesn't take. I don't think rocket science has ever been needed to apply when you're when you're booking Samoa Joe. Yet it has somehow eluded so many people that have been in charge of wrestling for some reason.
Also, just have to, mention this in terms of great matches, like his three match series with CM Punk in 2004 ROH was absolutely incredible. It holds up, but it was absolutely incredible for its
Mm-hmm.
time. The
Yeah,
triple threats with AJ and Daniels, Kobashi, Necro Butcher. Speaking of IWA Mid South, just that run is just so incredible.
yeah, he's a man. Matt and Jeff Hardy, still technically active, I guess. I wouldn't say anything in the last year has really helped their case. Or hurt their case. I mean, I do think they're kind of an intriguing argument from a historical significance perspective, but that's it for them as a tag team. You could make a case that Jeff Hardy as individual draw did quite well for a year or two in WWE, but I think if you're going to vote for them, you're voting for them because you think that they were a pioneering tag team, which in a lot of cases they were. I just don't see them as really strong candidates.
Yeah, the tough part from they definitely meet the historical significance criteria, absolutely for sure. But the even relative to era with drawing, I mean, they definitely sell tickets on the indies for sure, but they didn't really headline as a tag team anywhere really outside of that ROH run with the Young Bucks, which did set the ROH attendance record at that time. So that's definitely a credit
Mm-hmm.
to them. But outside of that, they didn't TNA never headlined with them as a tag team. WWE never did. So their tag team runs really more as they're the really popular mid carders. And then from a work perspective, obviously incredibly innovative, which I think goes to credit them for historical significance. But in just from a pure work standpoint, Dave has 13 of their matches rated 4 stars. Cage Match has 13 of their matches rated over 8, with 4 rated over 9. every single one of them is a ladder match. Like they're just, it's just they were like incredible innovators with the ladder match, and I have seen some. There's definitely like a handful of other matches you could argue, are at a similar level that don't involve ladders.
Mhm.
But for the most part, it's just like if they were in a ladder match, you were psyched. Outside of that, it's like, oh, it'll probably be good, but probably nothing that you're going to be voting on for match of the year or anything like
Yeah,
that.
because I think the rules on including guys as tag teams and individual candidacy, like I think Jeff alone would be like a more interesting character to discuss because of his solo and singles career, in terms of drawing power. At the same time, I understand like Matt needs to kind of be included because really the strongest case is that the Hardy Boys were an innovative team that definitely paved the way for a group like the Young Bucks. And then you can make a case like for indie wrestling and in general. I mean, the ladder match and people falling off ladders and going through tables. I know some people think that it's overexposed. It probably is. It still gets over every single time.
For sure.
Uh, Almost too much. Like I always am amazed by this. Like people still love table spots, man. Like people just want to see someone get slammed through a table. Like every wrestling show has been doing table spots for 25 plus years, 30 years, even if you go back to like like the Public Enemy like matches and things like that. And people still pop. It's more popular than ever. The crowd will annoyingly chant for table spots if they're not getting it. Like all of wrestling is like, you can't do this all the time because then it will get stale. You can't do this. You can't always do this big spot because then people won't like it. It will wear thin over time. And that's kind of true, but it's not true for table spots, man. People want to see people go through tables. It's like the most popular thing. Whoever, I don't know who was the first person to ever do it. I know people will talk about like was it like the Randy Savage, Jerry Lawler spot in Memphis wrestling in like 1982 or something with the pile driver through the timekeeper's table. Whoever invented, I don't care really who invented it, but like as a concept, it's like the most successful concept in the history of pro wrestling.
Yeah, it's like the Sex Panther cologne from Anchorman. 60% of the time, it works every time.
It literally works every time. Like name like a time someone went through the table and the crowd was like, "Oh no, a table spot!" Like it pops every time. When was the last time someone went underneath a ring and pulled out a table and the crowd didn't make at least some sort of positive reaction? It works literally every time. And it's
I
everyone's seen
can't
it.
I can't remember if that Bully Ray match at the New Japan ROH
Okay,
MSG
yeah.
show involved the table. That might have been the one
Yes,
time.
there probably are some isolated incidents, but I know like people understand my point, which is like it works literally every time. I know people are like the same thing with ladder matches. Like someone falling off a ladder through a table works literally every time. We just saw it on Wednesday night with Chris Jericho and Mark Briscoe. Becky Lynch, not like a super active year for Becky over the last year. I think her case is still largely probably hinging on the historical significance. I don't really buy that she's that historically significant of a wrestler. I understand that there was a period of time where she was probably the most popular wrestler in the world, and that's like a first for a women's wrestler. I think that was like just kind of like WWE didn't really, have anyone that was really a big star, and Becky got over for like 6 months, and like that's pretty much it. Like I don't. I have a really hard time with her as a candidate, um, for that reason.
Yeah, I do. I mean, I buy into the historical significance argument. I do think, especially like what she did was, it's the first time ever, that a woman was like, in terms of like being a full-time pro wrestler, like
Yeah,
the
but
number one
like
in the world.
Bronny James playing with LeBron was also the first time like a father and son played on an NBA court together at the same time, but like that
Well,
was
okay, what
manufactured.
right, but what I would say the difference though is, and I understand like also the arguments like, well, a lot of that was just because Ronda Rousey was, a huge star from MMA. But what I would say is there was clearly a difference between when Becky worked with Ronda compared to literally everyone else that
Yeah, for
worked with
sure.
Ronda.
Yeah,
Like
like I don't
it was
like
like night and day.
yes, like she got over in kind of like a less like a poor man's Brian Danielson in the sense like really got over with a certain segment of the fan base and um people wanted to see her. Um especially
Yeah,
because
I'll put it.
a lot of it,
Uh,
like Bryant Danielson, like stems from people feel like she wasn't treated fairly.
oh yeah, absolutely, absolutely. So I would say for me with her, like I'll vote for her eventually, because I do think like she deserves to be in the Hall of Fame because it is very historically significant, and WWE's. I think her role as part of the Four Horsewomen as well. Like I don't think I think people take that are starting to take that for granted a little bit as well, and just how much women's wrestling has progressed within the
Mhm.
last decade. Like you mentioned, Bryan Danielson. So I was at WrestleMania 30. Do you remember the women's match from WrestleMania 30?
I can't say I do.
It was a giant like
was
multi. There was a
was it
ton
like a
of
10
people in
woman
it.
was it like a 10
Yeah,
woman match? Yeah.
it was like a 10-woman match. It wasn't a tag. I don't think it was a tag, but it died a death because it went on right after the Brock Lesnar beat the Undertaker and ended the streak. So it was just like this like mid-card match that they put in the death spot. Like people did not care about the Divas division as recently as that was Jesse, that was barely over 10 years ago. So just like the advancement between then and now is like it's incredible. I don't think people appreciate that enough, and they take it for granted a bit. But it wasn't that long ago where there was like one women's match on a show. It was a novelty. Had maybe 5 minutes, and then everybody moved on, right? But like
Yeah.
now they actually headline sometimes, and she was the biggest star that helped with that progression. So for that reason and accomplishing something that no woman has ever done before in wrestling, I do think she warrants enough historical significance to get it on that alone. The problem that I have is she's a one category candidate. And so even though like that category, I think warrants induction, like if I'm ranking like draws and workers or including promos like on this ballot, like I just that's where I struggle to there's 7 other candidates I would put ahead of her basically. But someday I will vote for her.
Yes. My counterpoint, and one of the main reasons I'd be worried about putting in a one category candidate when that category is historical significance and that candidate is under the age of 40. Are we sure she's going to have long-term historical significance? Look at like that four horsewomen era, great. Look at where women's wrestling in WWE is now. Are we sure that like Becky Lynch and Mercedes and Bailey and Charlotte, are we sure that they are going to have this super long-term effect on the way people view women's wrestling? It doesn't seem like it's that way in WWE. You look at what the women's division is like in WWE now. You look at what the NXT women's wrestlers are and who they're kind of bringing in to be that next generation of women's wrestling. It feels like we're going backwards in a lot of ways. I think they're a little bit more serious about them as wrestlers for sure. But I'm wary that like the four horsewoman era, I don't know if that changed women's wrestling in WWE forever.
Oh no,
I,
well it did though. Because okay, I think your point is maybe it's getting more sexualized like the way it was
my point is
before.
that like yes, we're going back in time, and was this more of an outlier than it was a watershed moment that changed the way people saw women's wrestling forever?
Yeah, but the way they promote Rhea Ripley and the level of star she is a lot different than the way they promoted like Sable. Although I guess Sable did draw a
Mm,
lot of ratings back then, but
I was gonna say
it's
Sable
like
was a big star.
he was, but she also like didn't have any matches. So like
Rhea
they didn't.
Ripley barely wrestles.
Well, okay, but she's involved in a lot of matches. She's involved in a lot of matches, which
Sure.
Sable
Yes.
definitely was not. And they promote her as like that was true. She was basically like China for the Judgment Day for a while, but at this point now she's just like one of their top stars that they promote like as a headliner on a regular basis. So yeah, I do see your point that some like there in some ways there's been regression recently, but it's still completely night and day from
Yeah.
where it
I
was
mean,
say in 2014.
yeah, I would argue that it might end up being where she has a bigger impact outside of WWE than in it in terms of how serious women's wrestling is taken by other wrestling promotions.
Oh, that's definitely. I mean, New Japan has a women's division now, which is insane. Now, some of that might be just society in general. Like,
Yeah, I mean, I think that's a US that's like a U that but that's in part because that's like we want to tour in the US and people think they want to need to have women's matches in the US. Um,
right. But if the women were all horrible, like in a lot of those divas eras, that it still just might not have worked, right? Like they still like they might technically have more or do less sexualized things, but it still
mhm,
could just be like a straight up mid card novelty, which it's not.
yeah. John Moxley, he's a guy that's done a lot. Hasn't gotten in yet. The accolades certainly have been piling up for him in terms of like Wrestling Observer Awards. Um, I'm pretty sympathetic to his cause. It's good that he's back on the ballot now? He fell off and now he's back. Oh no, he
So
survived.
he
He fell off. He came back last year, and he was able to get enough support to remain on the ballot. Um,
correct.
I mean, he's one of the most important figures in AEW. Like he was definitely, I would say, definitely in the top five. And if you consider the creation of AEW as a massively historically significant event, which I think both of us do, um, he deserves a lot of credit for that. So I think his historical significance is climbing. His performance, I think, this is an important. We've talked so much about work so far, but it's important when we're talking about what actually the first category is that it's outstanding performance in one's field. So we're including stuff like promos, ability to get people over, ability to get angles over. It's not just, 4-star nut matches. That's a huge part of it, don't get me wrong. But I think definitely when we talk about people like John Moxley or even someone like someone like CM Punk, where it's like even if you might not think they're like amazing workers, maybe they work a style you don't really like. I think there's a little denying that they're excellent professional wrestling performers, which is a really key distinction that not a lot of the discussion in the Hall of Fame makes. That category one is not about just work; it is about the overall professional wrestling performance.
Yeah. On that note, though, so I mentioned the research I did before. How many 4-star matches do you think Dave has given John Moxley over the course of his career?
It's great. I actually was doing. I don't think I referenced him. I was doing some research on that's this specific topic. When I was writing about, I think it was when I was writing about Samoa Joe. Um, I'm gonna say Moxley has 85 4-star matches.
Ooh, that's close. I'm going to double check this, but I have it down as 122
Okay, so
4-star
that's a lot.
matches,
Yeah.
Dave. And with 86 cage match having over 8 and
Mhm.
8 of those being over 9. So even if you just wanted to like look at pure like match quality, like he's had a ton of
Yeah,
great
I,
matches.
I guess my point would be I'm thinking of a hypothetical like so like curmudgeon who's like, oh, he does this have these garbage matches where he bleeds. Like
Yeah,
I think I think he's a good worker. I think from what you just said, he's had many great matches. Some of the best matches of the last 10 years have involved John Moxley. Um, but I'm saying even if you remove yourself from like maybe you don't like his in-ring style, there's still so much there as a performer where I still think he checks that first category.
yeah, absolutely. I mean, obviously, if you, I mean, what, 2-time wrestler of the year, he's won like best interview or at least placed highly like
Mhm.
a number of times. I think I have him as having 18 like top 5 or Observer Award finishes, or like category B wins, like best brawler or like US MVP. He's got a bunch of those too. And then
He's a very critically acclaimed wrestler. Like that trophy case is
yes,
piling up.
and then even as a headliner perspective, from a headliner perspective, people don't realize like how much he was a headliner in WWE. So like not these aren't just necessarily straight main events, but on shows where you could consider like him one of the primary drawing cards, like whether it was with the Shield or just in like a singles match, a big time singles match, even if he didn't necessarily go on last. You're like, okay, those matches are kind of equal in terms of fan interest. I have him at 32 main events, or at least, like primary drawing card matches between WWE and AEW. Like that's a lot. Like if you think about like, oh, if someone headlined like 6 months out of a year, that's over 5 years of
Mhm.
doing that. So like he definitely has the longevity, from a drawing perspective. And he's obviously, critically acclaimed as a wrestler and a performer. And then from a historical significance standpoint, we talked about this last year, but with AEW's new TV deal, now it's even more cemented. Like he was like a headliner for their first 6 months on Dynamite, right? Like their first pay-per-view after Dynamite started was him against Kenny Omega and Cody versus Jericho, right? He had the lights out match with Omega, and then with Revolution, like him against Jericho as well. And so Dynamite was so successful so quickly that TNT ripped up their ad share deal and then actually paid them like money for the show, which allowed them to survive the pandemic that hit just like 2 months after that. So, and look at what AEW turned into with All In being one of the biggest shows ever, and now getting their second TV deal, and he's just so vital to their survival and early success. Like I know people list like the Elite and Jericho as like the most important people for AEW's like creation and early success, but he is next in line after them at worst.
Yeah, I mean, people talk like I said, Cody gets a lot of credit for founding AEW, which credit he's earned. I'm not saying it's misplaced, but John Moxley to me deserves just as much credit. He is obviously he's been around AEW for a lot longer than Cody, who ducked out when he had a chance to go back to WWE. But he has been in a lot of ways the heart and soul of AEW. And I do think like you know, his appearance at Double or Nothing and laying out Kenny Omega and having that brawl was a hugely instrumental moment for the company. I think it sent, in hindsight, I think it sent a really strong message to a ton of people who were sampling that product. Um, like, because if you say you checked out Double or Nothing, and a lot of people checked out Double or Nothing not knowing that much about AEW, right? Their first ever pay per view didn't even have TV yet. What's this new thing gonna be like? People sampled the product, main event ends, Chris Jericho beats Kenny Omega, okay. And then you go off the air, John Moxley makes an appearance, the biggest free agent in wrestling, legit huge star in WWE, gets a gigantic reaction. Him and Kenny Omega have this crazy brawl. Show goes off the air. Like, I'm just picturing myself as like the hypothetical like person who is sampling the AEW product, which technically we all were, but some of us, like you and I, would be like probably like a little bit more informed about what we were going to get. Um, like, but the reaction to that, like, oh my god, this is such an exciting, lively promotion where crazy important stuff happens, and I gotta tune in to whenever their next show is to find out what's going to happen because John Moxley just showed up and had this brawl with Kenny Omega, and that's how the show went off the air. And I just think that's a defining message that it sent to all of these, possibly skeptical fans about what this promotion was going to be like and whether it could deliver on things like that. Like the Cody and Dustin match was great too. But I do think that like John Moxley making his debut and just that whole message it was sent was such a positive one for AEW, really helped the company get off the ground. I don't know what it looks like if that doesn't happen, if he just resigns with WWE.
Yeah, no, great point. Also, like probably possibly JR's last like Hall of Fame level incredible call that you'd have as like one of JR's best calls in his
Mm-hmm.
career. Like I don't know if he knew Moxley was showing up or not, but he was so excited, and that really like put over that moment. Like, yeah, absolutely incredible landmark moment for AEW, Moxley, and based on the way things turned out, the wrestling industry as a whole.
Yeah, I mean, he that image of him coming through the crowd. Like, you think the show's over, Jericho's cutting his promo. You think maybe something is going to happen just based on, the pro wrestling nature of it. Jericho's asking people to give him thanks or something like that. And then just no music hits. There's no big entrance pop for him coming out. but they just show cuts. You see people kind of turning around the crowd, and then they cut to him, and they see, oh my God, it's Jon Moxley. He's coming through the crowd. Most people had never seen him outside of a WWE setting at that point. What's going to happen? And then he just brawls with Kenny Omega. It sets the entire tone for the promotion. So I think historically significance. Again, he's still very active. There's a lot, there's still many things to be written about his career. It seems like, he's the world champion right now. It seems like he's the centerpiece of what appears to be like a major creative effort in AEW. So there's plenty of more time for him to add to his legacy, but I think he's a really, really strong candidate at this point, and I'll strongly be considering voting for him.
Yeah, some people, I just have to say this. Some people think some people are like, oh, I don't know. He's still active. He's still doing his career. It's like, it's not. It's not too soon. He's been his TLC debut with the Shield was in 2012. And he's just consistently been a headliner.
Yeah. And I mean,
he
was the heart and soul of the Shield, certainly when it first started. Like, he was, it kind of revolved around of like who people thought was going to be the biggest star in that group. But when they first debuted and they were as hot, the hottest they were ever as a group was when, those first several months, it was like, Jon Moxley was the pivotal figure. He was cutting all the promos. Roman was a hot tag guy. Seth took a lot of bumps, but Moxley was the star of that group. I feel pretty strongly about that. I know, like, now in hindsight, I'm sure in WWE, WWE's version of history, Roman was always the biggest star in that group. And it's like Roman was always groomed for that role in that group, but Jon Moxley was the biggest star in that group. I feel very confident about saying that. That's not a small part of his legacy either.
Yeah, no, I mean, that gets people forget about that now. But anyway, my point with bringing that up was just like, look, people are voting like Paul Orndorff. We don't need to talk too much about him. I think Paul Orndorff's a Hall of Famer. But if you look at Paul Orndorff's like initial run, he has about a decade, as a headliner before his injury that he has to retire from. Like Jon Moxley's been active in promotions and main eventing for over a decade now. So
I'm sure
for people saying it's too soon, it's like, no, it's not. Like he's more than proven himself. And I know like, oh, well, some other people might be coming up on the ballot, in coming years. But look, I mean, Moxley's there's no way he's not one of like the 10 like best or most significant wrestlers of this, the last 10 years. Like he has to be in there, at least within the US. Like he's definitely a Hall of Famer for me at this point.
Yeah. The next two guys on the ballot, both not active, Kevin Nash and Scott Hall and Paul Orndorff. I know I am an Orndorff voter. I believe you are an Outsiders voter. Or at least you were in the past. I don't know if if they're gonna make the cut with this bloated category, but
yeah, I definitely vote for Paul Orndorff. Have the last 2 years. I'll vote for him again this year. Outsiders, I don't think they'll make the cut this year. They're a little bit older than some of the more modern candidates, so the standards for them are a little bit different. But I will say, I think their historical significance and like how they're assessed as draws, I think is incredibly underrated. Like when they show up on Nitro. Like if you look at the period, like Nitro's first, 9 months on the air before they show up, and then the ratings the 9 months after, they increase the ratings by 25%, which think about that. That's insane. And then the Bash at the Beach pay-per-view is the most bought WCW pay-per-view without Hogan. Okay. I think since Sting and Flair at the Great American Bash in 1990. And then they like World War III that year was up I want to say over 10%. It might have even been over 30% in pay-per-view buys, and that didn't have Hogan on it, even though it had Hogan on it the year before. And it was that that crazy battle royal that they always had. But then the other match on it was the Outsiders against the Nasty Boys and Ming and the Barbarian. So they're popping buy rates as well. Like I think they have 7 buy rates that are just crazy in terms of ones that they popped in WCW. So they were a drawing team on their own, and even without Hogan. during those years. The problem is they have absolutely no case as in-ring performers, and it's an incredibly short run. They're like together as a team for like 2 years. So, but I think there is a case there that they're a Hall of Fame level draw for that short period, and definitely, I mean, they kick off like what becomes like the boom period and the whole Attitude Era. Like they're the catalyst for that in WCW. So, but it's tough. It's a very short period, and if you don't believe in that historical significance or think there's some negatives that weigh that down, then yeah, I can understand why people wouldn't vote for them.
Guaranteed contracts, not nothing.
That too.
Yeah, not nothing in the grand scheme of things. Randy Orton, my opinion on Randy Orton has not changed at all. Although he did have a very frustrating match with Walter, which did kind of just reiterate my feelings on Randy Orton, which is that he's a very boring wrestler that in a lot of ways lacks. Yeah, go ahead.
I was gonna say, but over the last, so as I've been doing more drawing research and stuff, like my opinion of Orton as a draw has improved, while my opinion of him as a worker has regressed.
Yeah.
So I don't really know how to feel about Randy Orton. I'll just say I'm not inspired to vote for him, but he's headlined like, I want to say like approximately 90 like WWE pay-per-views.
Yes, I believe he is the second most all time.
I think he might be first, honestly. Like
No, I think Triple H is still first. People,
okay.
Yeah, never forget how many pay-per-views Triple H main evented.
Okay, good point. I should have remembered that. Yeah, so I mean, it's absurd. Now, obviously, a lot of those periods weren't particularly successful for WWE, but like we brought up earlier about steering a cruise ship. That's not necessarily always his fault, but he also just like, in terms of like top 5 like Observer Award stuff, he has more like worst of the year placements than he does best of the year. So
he's someone that like has had so much opportunity to do well in like the Observer Awards, because he's gotten long world title runs. He's gotten big match opportunities. Like that's like the damning thing about him is like, I'm just gonna say like to throw out an example of someone like, I think Lance Storm is a really good wrestler. I think for his time period, Lance Storm was one of the best wrestlers in America. Lance Storm doesn't have like a massive catalog of great matches, largely because he was stuck wrestling as a mid-carder in companies that didn't value what he did really well, to give him a bunch of opportunities to have a bunch of great matches. So like there are some like, Lance Storm matches, I really like his match with Bryan Danielson in Ring of Honor, but like he doesn't have like the massive catalog that like a guy like Bryan Danielson has. Because, or even like a guy like, say, like Shawn Michaels has. Randy Orton to me is like, when we talk about like a guy that really lacks like a bunch of amazing matches, he has no excuse because he's been given opportunities to be in the position to have great matches for so many years in a row. He's had, okay, here's 20 minutes at the end of a pay-per-view for a world title match. Go out there and work. And the fact that the results aren't there are really damaging, because he is not someone who suffered from not having the opportunity the way like someone like Lance Storm or maybe like someone like a William Regal did, where it's like, okay, yeah, these guys are good wrestlers, don't have a great catalog of matches. Like Randy Orton, okay, you could say he's technically a good wrestler, and he doesn't have this great catalog of matches despite the 90 pay-per-view main events.
Yeah, Dave has 57 Randy Orton 4-star matches. Cage Match has 30 over 8, but only 1 over 9, which is Backlash 2004. But to your point, I know what you're going to say. A lot of those matches rated 8 or 4 stars are probably like Survivor Series matches and Elimination Chambers and Money in the Banks and Royal Rumbles and stuff like that. So yeah, it's the output just isn't really there, especially because his entire career has been. So it's not like there's a ton of stuff we haven't seen that isn't out there. His entire career has been televised. Like we've had access and seen everything like in real time.
Actually, great. Glad you pointed it out, because I actually now remember when we were talking about Samoa Joe earlier. I had done this research. I remember it was for this article I wrote on Randy Orton following his match with Walter, which I did not like. So I did this kind of research. So like on Cage Match, Orton has 497 matches on Cage Match during his career that have official ratings, which I believe is at least 15 votes. But because he's been a WWE wrestler, like he doesn't have many. Like these are huge totals. Most of these have hundreds, if not thousands, of ratings. So it's not like we're talking about an older wrestler, maybe like a Joshi wrestler, where there's like 10 people really weighting things one way or the other. This is Randy Orton. So he has 497 matches in his career with ratings. How many of them? And so I did the research, like how many of those have a rating of 8 or higher? He has 32 8 or higher matches out of 497. John Cena, a contemporary of his, has 41. And Cena's like reputation as a worker is way lesser than Randy Orton's among like most critics, it seems like. Like John Cena's a famously bad like wrestler, but he has more, great matches according to Cage Match than Randy Orton. And if you compare him to anyone who's actually considered to be good, who was like a contemporary of his, like Bryan Danielson has 187 matches rated 8 or better. AJ Styles has 103 matches rated 8 or better. Samoa Joe has 61, double the amount that Randy Orton has. So it's like if you compare him to his contemporaries in terms of in-ring work, in terms of at least matches, he has a really weak case compared to pretty much all of his contemporaries. And you could say like, oh, well, is he compelling promo? Is he compelling like performer and pro wrestler? I don't think so. Vince McMahon thinks so, but I just don't see it at all with him. It's only gotten worse.
Yeah, and I also hated that Walter match.
Well, it's just like
he went there and it's like, okay, it's not Walter's hometown, right? But it's close enough, right? Like people
right.
are there to see him and cheer their guy.
Mhm.
And instead of having Walter's match and letting him chop him, they wrestle a Randy Orton match. It's like, what are
Yeah.
you doing?
And that was my point, which is like, as great as Orton is considered fundamentally, and he really is great fundamentally from what we can tell. Like he doesn't botch spots. His offense always looks good. He knows how to sell. Like he has all of those tools, but he lacks like the instincts to be like, we're going to go out here and have the match the crowd wants to see. Like in his mind, he's like, yeah, we'll do this match where I'll beat you up for most of it, and then he'll make a babyface comeback. But that's not, people don't want to see Walter make a babyface comeback. They want to see Walter kick the shit out of Randy Orton. Like this is not the match to work Walter like he's Ricky Morton. Okay? Because he's not that kind of wrestler. And to not understand that, because like, and I said, it's like a way less talented wrestler than Randy Orton could have a great match with Walter. They have. But there's something there where it's just like, yeah, we're gonna work this Randy Orton match instead. Makes me mad.
Yeah, I don't know if at this point it's a physical thing or just a lack of motivation or whatever, but he's just always been able to get by like, because he is naturally talented, but
yeah.
he
And
just doesn't
the
he's not
company's always
motivated.
the company's always rewarded him. They've always pushed him when he's broken rules. They've bent the rules and let him do whatever he wants. And
And I'm sure
he's been
yeah, and I'm
rewarded
sure
with. Go ahead.
I was gonna say, I'm sure some of that is also just like him like doing what he learned to do, like when
Oh
he
yeah,
was trained way back in the early 2000s, right? But that only works because he's been pushed at the level he's been for so long, and because he's physically like looks the way that he does.
yeah. Looks the
It's
part,
yeah.
has a cool finishing move that everyone likes. Like that's like kind of the blueprint for how to get over in WWE. Has cachet because he's been pushed for 20 years. So there's this notoriety that comes with him that younger wrestlers are going to struggle to get. But like as a critical evaluator, I think it's important that like people like you and I stand up and tell the truth. Damn it.
Yeah, he's a good wrestler. He's not a great wrestler. That's what it is. That's what it
Great
comes down to.
wrestler that never has great matches.
Yeah.
That's what it is. Like you put Randy Orton's tools and ability into a wrestler with a different mind and a different level of motivation. Like the next guy on this list, Kevin Owens, right? What if you gave Kevin Owens Randy Orton's look and athleticism? Like how
Man,
great of a wrestler would that guy be?
Well, I don't know. Kevin Owens is already more athletic than Randy Orton, I
Well,
feel
he
like.
is now. Like, well, I'm talking, but like just like from like a talent perspective, from like a mind perspective, because Owens the next candidate. Owens, I kind of see the case of Owens kind of like Samoa Joe. I don't think he has peaks nearly as high as Samoa Joe, which is why I wouldn't really consider him a strong candidate necessarily. But like Owens, I think is like I've seen his entire career, super super talented guy, done some amazing stuff, been kind of bogged down by WWE's creative and kind of in the inconsistencies that come there. But I think from a talent perspective and from just like a was this guy a super good professional wrestler? I think he checks those boxes at least.
Yeah, I mean, I totally agree. I mean, I'd say he's definitely a Hall of Fame level performer because I mean his work, like '07, him and Generico, that tag feud with the
Mhm.
Briscoes, and those years together that they had as a tag team, and then feuding with each other. And then his return to ROH after that, after he was gone for a year, like that final battle where he beats Steve Corino and then like package pile drives Jimmy Jacobs, who was the ref, and then Jim Cornette as well. Like just made him like a superstar in one night. Like it's one of the best like things I've ever seen in wrestling about how
Yeah,
to
I mean,
make someone. And I think they were trying to make him a heel, but they made him like the most popular guy in the company.
yeah. So the
Um,
first Ring of Honor show I've ever been to in my life, there's a, I guess I suppose there's a chance you were there as well. Boiling Point in Providence, Rhode Island. Did you go to that show?
I did not know, but
Okay, it's probably best known as like the show where Tommaso Ciampa like tore his um what he tore his thigh or something like that. Um, Tommaso Ciampa suffered a super bad injury in the early portion of his match. Is probably what's best known for. But the main event was Eddie Kingston versus um, Kevin Steen, and like it really wasn't a great wrestling match, but the energy was really high, and like after the match, like he got into it with a fan, and then he like grabbed the fan and kissed the fan. Remember he used to do that? Um, and like
yes.
everyone was like just like losing their shit. Like it felt like a riot was about to break out. It was like, and then again, this is my first Ring of Honor show ever, and I'm like, whoa, this is different. This guy is different. I knew who he was and things like that, but like I hadn't seen him live and in person or anything like that. And it's like I'll never forget like that feeling, like just being in the venue like that. I don't think that would happen with wrestling now. It just wrestling's different than it was, but it felt like some real outlaw nature to it. I don't think his career has delivered. A lot of it is because of WWE, him being in WWE. His career hasn't delivered the way that I thought it probably could have. But in terms of just like a talent as someone that could be a compelling persona, could wrestle, could talk, even using WWE speech, um, he has very few peers just based on raw professional wrestling talent. Um, the only thing he lacking was the look, which obviously held him back in a lot of eyes. But I mean, even then, he's made out well for himself in WWE, given how most people figured it was probably going to go for him.
Yeah, so on the talent standpoint, I have him as with 16 top five finishes in Major Observer Awards, or like
Hmm.
winning Best Brawler, which he did a number of times. So lots of Best Brawler wins, Best Interview placements, feuds of the year. The feud of the year, like he was number 3 in 2015 against John Cena, number 5 in 2011 for that feud against ROH, number 1 last year for with Sami Zayn against the Bloodline. Um,
God,
so like people really love that, they really did. So I mean, as a talent, he's definitely like a Hall of Fame level performer to me. And then look, as a draw, like we're talking about like, all right, like maybe things, his career maybe hasn't necessarily delivered what we had hoped he could be, but he's headlined or like, co-headlined, however you want to say it. But I have him as like one of the primary drawing cards on 23 WWE pay-per-view events. And 2 of those are he has the WrestleMania with Stone Cold and the Sami Zayn match with the Usos as well for one of those nights. So like, I mean, I don't know, like his WWE career has been highly successful. I think maybe critically, a lot of it pales in comparison to the work that he did before he joined WWE, but he's had a hell of a run there. And I
Yeah, I mean
think
his
his
Jericho feud.
candidacy, I think, is very underrated.
Yeah, his Jericho feud, was very good. They had the tag team, they had the whole list gimmick. That was probably Jericho's like last great moment in WWE.
Oh yeah, for sure. I mean, yeah,
Mhm.
after Jericho left because he was in large part because he was disappointed with how that ended up playing out because it had gotten so over. Yeah, but before it got, before Vince ended it the way he did.
We got some heavy hitters coming up. Adam, talk about CM Punk.
Oh, well, I mean, at this point, I mean, what are we even doing here with
We've talked
CM
a
Punk?
lot about CM Punk,
We have.
specifically on the show.
I think I mean, he's obviously a Hall of Fame level performer. We're talking about like he has like high match of the year rankings. He has a ton of four-star matches, maybe not as much as some of his contemporaries that are rated highly for work,
Well,
but
I
he
think
also,
I think it's important, like when we're talking about Moxley, like the distinction was even if you don't really like his in ring work, like as a overall professional wrestling performer, it's
yeah,
extremely hard to dispute that he has not been excellent in that role.
yeah, I mean, one of the best promos of his generation, and honestly, one of the best promos ever, but definitely one of the
Mhm.
best promos of his generation. I mean, as a pay-per-view headliner, co-headliner, like over 30,
Yeah, I mean,
between WWE and AEW.
yeah, I mean, from a drawing perspective, this has been a really good year for him to increase his reputation because he's done very well popping stuff for WWE.
Yeah, he's clearly a ratings draw. WrestleNomics has, these are estimates, but they have him as the top WWE merch seller this year. Based on their estimates. Obviously, like the Drew McIntyre feud. I mean, this is the most over Drew's ever been in WWE, and it's definitely not a coincidence that it's he's CM Punk's big program when he comes back. So I mean, it's
Get
just
it back.
at the,
Sorry, I just had to get that in there.
I think at this point, like I know some people will say, "Oh well, like he definitely he hurt AEW," and look, it's true. Brawl Out definitely did damage AEW to some degree, but look, they have their TV deal, so clearly he didn't like sink the entire company to be like a negative historical significance on the industry. And I just want to remind people, Ric Flair took the WCW belt on WWF television and left without putting anyone over. Now, people might blame WCW management more for that, but I mean, that hurt them a lot too, like him not working that out. So I'll just say, like, there's tons of disputes between companies and pro wrestlers, and but I don't think that makes someone a negative from a historical significance standpoint on the entire industry, unless they did something so bad that it like sunk the company and then made the industry worse. And now we know definitively that Punk didn't do that with AEW.
Yeah, you mentioned like people who might feel that way. Those people are me. I think CM Punk being like an impossible to work with asshole, like has done serious damage to AEW. He's not entirely to blame for it. A lot of it had to do with how it was handled from a management perspective. But I have a hard time voting for him this year, despite all the strengths you just said, because I do think that his unprofessionalism did enormous damage to AW's reputation, the faith that people have in the company. And yes, they got the TV deal, which protects them from going out of business immediately and all that. But I do think it has caused a really significant downturn in AW's the way AEW is viewed by a lot of fans, and also the way that he has gone out and conducted himself in terms of really attacking the media is something that I don't really respect. I'm gonna have. I totally understand the argument for him, and I think some people may think I'm sounding ridiculous right now. I'm gonna have a hard time writing his name down on the ballot, despite the fact that he does fit a lot of the criteria, like you just said.
It's not the Hall of Good Guys, Jesse. There's a ton of horrible people in the Hall of Fame for sure. He's just, he's definitely an asshole. And there's definitely a lot of bad things that he's done for sure. But I don't know. I think that's more on I think because we've been experiencing it in real time, it might feel larger than it is
Well,
in the grand scheme
part of
of
the reason I have a
things.
hard time voting for him currently, and I voted for him. I voted for him in the past. Um, the other point I would mention with Punk is just and I've said this before, but I really hear no one else talk about it, so I'm going to say it again. His like the whole since he's returned to pro wrestling, like he's just become such a gigantic star in terms of being a ratings mover and paper selling all those pay-per-views to All In and or All Out and all that stuff has been huge boons to his candidacy in general. He did like not wrestle for 8 years of his prime, which created a really like inorganic demand for his services when he first came back, and later when he came back to WWE and obviously has helped do big business. And I don't know. That's just it's hard. It makes him a particularly challenging candidate to evaluate because of that. Because like if you were starting a wrestling promotion, would you rather have the guy who is like a good draw for 3 years, then disappears off the face of the earth for what is it, 6 to 8 years? I can't even remember how long it was. And then he comes back and he's a huge draw. Or would you rather have someone who was like a solid draw and really consistent for like 10 to 15 years? I don't know. It's one and there's arguments both ways. I totally get the drawing power perspective. He's certainly really shown that he has a lot of staying power in terms of a drawing in WWE too. He's still doing business for them. He's still popping quarter hours. You can look at what he did for selling tickets to the NXT taping, and then subsequently what the St. Louis taping with Randy Orton did as a comparison point just recently. So he's clearly shown that. I just part of his candidacy that is confusing to me is like he created a ton of anticipation for his return to pro wrestling by not contributing to the industry at all for like 6 to 8 years.
Yeah, but I mean, same thing with Edge, and look at the difference between both of them.
Well, yeah, I think he's a bigger draw than Edge, but I'm just saying it
Well,
in
okay,
general.
let's
And
rephrase
and
it then.
Punk also chose to not do these things, as opposed to Edge was, for all, what we're all led to believe, legitimately injured and needed time to come back.
Right, but I guess what I'm saying is like Edge was also gone for a long time and was also a heavily promoted star at a similar in a similar way as Punk was, like in terms of how heavily WWE pushed and promoted them. And there's a massive difference in terms of how they were both received when they came back, years later.
Yeah.
I mean, I would just ask, like, if you're ranking draws post Attitude Era in the US, like, how many people are stronger than Punk? It's like what, Cena, Brock, like
Yeah, I mean,
Roman,
it would
like
depend. I mean, yeah, I
Cody,
mean,
like
but even Brock and Roman fall into that category where like the infrequency of their appearances,
Mhm.
um, has obviously contributed to there being more demand when they do show up. Like Brock was a huge draw and did really well when he would show up, but like part of that was because Brock wrestled like 3 matches a year.
yeah,
Um, yeah,
that's
no,
true.
no,
But Brock's
yeah,
in, so
yeah, definitely. If
really,
we're talking about, well, yeah, I mean, I wasn't a voter when Brock was a candidate. I mean, I think that would be a really interesting discussion, to be honest, because that was also he got in for being, I think, an MMA draw too, which, um,
yeah, that was weird. But oh, actually, on that note, Punk did something similar, right? I mean, he only
oh,
did it once because
that
once people saw the fight,
he sold those
once people
UFC pictures.
he did. I mean, that was yeah. I mean, he sold like an extra. I think if you look at like who was
Yeah.
headlining the
Okay,
event
okay,
he was on,
we can induct him, but he's going in the Sakuraba wing of the whole thing.
you know what? I'll take that. I'll take that. He's there with
No,
Funaki and Sakuraba. Yeah, hanging out. All right.
no comparison. Like Punk is like a huge wrestling star. Anyway, we're gonna move on to another awesome candidate to discuss. Another guy who is super unique, and that's Roman Reigns. I have heard Adam. A lot of people mention like Roman's getting in this year. Like he didn't get in last year. Like this year, he's getting in. Has he really done a whole lot over the last year to warrant this compared to where he was last year? Like WrestleMania was hugely successful. If you remember WrestleMania, like Roman rapidly became the least interesting person involved in the main WrestleMania angle.
Not
Like,
true.
not true. Can you elaborate on that point? Adam, are you there? We've lost Adam. He was in such a rage that I
I'm back.
insulted his tribal. Oh, I just assumed because insulted the tribal chief that you had left in such a
No, no,
rage.
no, no. I said he was third. He was not the least interesting person because Seth Rollins was involved in that
Okay.
as well.
Yeah, I forgot. Seth Rollins was so uninteresting that I forgot he was like, oh yeah, see, who was Cody? Obviously, had a tag team partner. Anyway, obviously Roman has really turned the narrative around on like he's now gone from being a bust to a huge star. Um, he has definitely I definitely think like if we're going back, like looking at his career, I think the fact that he has helped elevate the Usos to such a strong degree, especially that SummerSlam from last year. Now the match wasn't any good, but the momentum for that feud was very strong. I think that's a feather in his cap. The Rock showed up and did huge business. I mean, he's The Rock. I guess my point is I'm still not a Roman voter. Do you feel like the needle has really been moved on Roman from the last time we had this discussion last fall?
Yes, I do. And I think a big thing is so like last year, WWE's average attendance was the highest it had been since 2001,
Mhm.
which is insane. And then this year, it's gotten even bigger.
Mhm.
Now, obviously, the natural counter argument to that is, well, Roman Reigns is barely ever around, right? Like, he barely wrestles. He only does a few matches a year, which is all very valid. But I guess what I'll say is he does, when he is working matches, he does show up to the TVs, which definitely helps draw. Even when he's
Not
not
recently on
around,
SmackDown, but yeah.
yeah, but even when he's not around, like this whole bloodline thing, like who Cody feuded with, like over the summer. I mean, like everyone was anticipating like Roman coming back
Yes.
to
The
work with
main
them, and
event
people,
the main event of SummerSlam was literally Roman is going to come back at some point. Like he
yeah,
wasn't advertised for it, but like that Cody versus Sokoa match was basically like be excited because Roman's going to come back, not because of the match itself.
yeah, nobody cares about Solo Sikoa if he's not like pretending to be Roman, right? Like if like they just like if they did some sort of angle where it was just like Solo Sikoa doing a non-bloodline group that Roman wouldn't have necessarily cared about, then like nobody cares about Solo Sikoa heel leader. Um, so I guess it's more like this like post-pandemic expansion of WWE's business is it's historic. Like I don't think people realize. I think some people realize it, but I don't think others
Yes,
realize like
they were going
how
down. They were,
crazy it
yeah, I
is.
mean, going down for decades.
Yeah, yeah. So I mean, and I will say like that it's really more like 2015 through like when the pandemic like through the pandemic year. Like
Mhm.
that was really when they went downhill. Like they had been going like downhill slightly gradually like before that, but it was pretty stable. Like some years they'd go back up, some years they'd go back down. Their pay-per-view business fell off a lot, which is why they went to the network model. But a lot of the pay-per-view business falling off was because Vince rotated the same like 8 main eventers on every pay per view for like 5 years straight. But anyway, but I digress. It's just like him being like their top guy during this expansion period, and then helping get Cody over as the next top guy, and then effectively turning babyface, which was what they always wanted him to be as
Mhm.
well. I feel like that also like proves something, at least in terms of him, like as a talent and as a performer. Where now I agree, his matches are dreadful now. He's turned into Randy Orton, where he just doesn't try because he doesn't need to, I guess. But it does prove that I think that okay, like maybe the problem wasn't always him necessarily. Like the problem was probably just the booking of him back in the 2015s,
Mhm.
because I understand like there's definitely an argument it was a war of attrition with him, but things definitely turned around after they put him in the heel role, which is what everybody said he should have done back in 2015. And there's a ton of people WWE has tried to push endlessly and make into huge stars like Alberto Del Rio and Sheamus and Seth Rollins, and it just hasn't worked with any of them. So whenever something does work at this level, like the performer is definitely part of it.
Right, and, there are other there are obviously other factors in play, Vince getting ousted, Triple H taking over, that organic momentum in the product, but, throughout all of wrestling history, when we look at some of the biggest draws in wrestling history, there have been other factors in play that have contributed to their success. So, it's hard to necessarily penalize Roman where, like, you can be like, "Oh, well, you know, Vince's scandal, brought more attention on the product. Then when he left, people came back to the product because they were excited to see what Triple H was going to do, and the product has delivered, and um, that kind of stuff. But like it's hard to hold that necessarily like, oh, that's the reason they're hot. Like obviously, Roman has played a huge role. I think it's hard to talk about guys when we're talking about like, oh, well, even when they're not there, they should get credit. Like I feel like that's kind of a slippery slope conversation. But I do agree with your point in general that like, okay, like we don't have to necessarily say like, oh, Raw ratings were great. We got to credit Roman with that, even if he has nothing to do with Raw. But we're talking about like Solo Sokoa getting like a main event match and like that show not bombing is largely because Roman is directly involved with that. Um, my obviously I think Roman's drawing case is getting stronger and stronger. Although I still think like his because of his infrequent performances, it's hard for him to really make a dent on how I feel about him in a lot of ways, in terms of he's just not around that much. It's not something I particularly value that highly when guys are taking a lot of time off and when they show up, yeah, they pop a rating. Well, they're never around. Um, I think my general point on Roman is, and people think like I'm probably joking when I say this, um, Roman sucks, and I'm not going to vote for somebody who sucks. I think he is a very bad performer. I think he is totally devolved as a performer. He gets zero credit for me in category one, zero. And from a historical significance category, I'm very concerned about this Shakespeare in the Park style match that he has popularized, and you're starting to see other people in WWE copy it. I think it's a complete subversion of the art form of professional wrestling and has a chance to do real long term damage on what people think of as being a great match. Um, and you can say that's obviously, subjective in terms of my opinion on that. Uh, but that's okay. This is my Hall of Fame ballot. I'm supposed to be subjective. That's the point. Dave is asking my opinion on things. I have a real hard time with Roman just because I think he's not particularly relevant in category one or category three. And his drawing record, while positive recently, was not positive for a large portion of his career. Um, and I have a hard time. I'll have a really hard time voting for him. And frankly, because his performances are so infrequent now, I don't know what he's going to do in the future to make me change my mind. Like he can headline a couple more WrestleManias, great. He can pop a few more ratings when he shows up on television infrequently, great. That to me is not going to really move the needle that much for me personally. Um, if he could have better matches, that would probably help. Um, but I just think he's been like critically awful, awful wrestler lately. Um, and I have a hard time voting for him because of that. That's really what's coming down to at this point.
Yeah, you're like the other end of the spectrum from the people who hate the Young Bucks and feel
Right.
that way
And
about
and
them.
I was talking about this with oh shit, what's his name? Ethan Tyler. And he was, pointing out, he's like, well, people say that about the Young Bucks, like, right, like, the Young Bucks, like, there are
They're
people out there that just
ruining
absolutely
wrestling.
hate the Young Bucks style, think they're ruining wrestling, that kind of thing. Um, the major difference is those people are wrong and I am right. Like what Roman's doing is literally not pro wrestling. It is explaining to the audience so the lowest common denominator understands the motivations of the characters, not through action, but through words. And it's like something totally different than pro wrestling. It's not like, oh, the Young Bucks doing some flips and are doing ballet. No, no, no. I also would point out that a lot of people that say that have absolutely no understanding of what the Young Bucks are actually doing. They'll say the Young Bucks don't sell. They'll say the Young Bucks don't know how to structure a match. All of stuff I think is personally bullshit, having watched many, many Young Buck matches. I'm watching these Roman Reigns matches. I'm not living here in this castle of ignorance, where I'm just saying stuff that without really consuming the product. I've seen all of his big matches. I'm watching how this goes, and I've watched a lot of pro wrestling in my life, and I was like, this shit sucks. I'm gonna have a hard time voting for somebody with that. I think that. And that's part of the challenge of the contemporary ballot, right? Is that I can't go back and tell you Johnny Vergo's stuff sucks. I might actually think it does if I start watching it, but because there's so little around, and because it's also from such a time period where I'm so unaccustomed to what it is, um, my opinion on his in-ring work can't really be considered that valuable or that informed ultimately if I'm just going back and watching stuff from 50 or 60 years ago. The Roman stuff, I've been here this entire time. I've watched literally his entire career. His stuff's not good, and it's getting worse. And I'm also very concerned that it's going to fundamentally change not all of wrestling, but the WWE version of wrestling. And I think any like possible goodwill I have left for WWE is going to be gone if this is the future of the way that they promote their shows.
Well, maybe Roman saw that South Park episode about wrestling when he was younger, and that was what inspired him to evolve the way he
I
has.
think that they experimented with stuff during the pandemic. Like remember the Hell in a Cell match he had, and they were in the
Oh
Thunderdome.
yeah.
Maybe that was it was post Thunderdome. Like they experimented with that, and I understood why they experimented with that kind of stuff. Because it was, there were no fans. It was really difficult. You're taking shots. The fact that when we resumed it, it was still going on in the main event matches. It just feels like the opposite of what pro wrestling is fundamentally. What pro wrestling is, um, and they're really boring. Like even the fans, like even the hardcore WWE fans, like kind of understand that these matches aren't good, but they're excited for the moments, and it's a way different than I think anything we've ever seen before, as opposed to like Young Bucks wrestling the Dragon Gate style in the US. People getting mad about that.
Yeah, I don't know. Hulk Hogan had a lot of awful matches too, with his Hulk up, and you know, I'm sure
But yeah, I
that
know.
had a
But
big
even
thing
then,
too.
Hulk Hogan was largely just like doing basic fundamental wrestling. In a lot of ways. Yes, the Hulk up was kind of dumb, but guys were no selling before Hulk Hogan, and they no sold after him. Like, I think Hulk Hogan's drawing record is a little bit more substantial than Roman Reigns.
It is. I do just want to add though with Roman that yeah, obviously like the post recovery period and business expansion, it's only been a few years, but even before that, like look, I know like giving someone credit for headlining WrestleMania is like they sell those tickets so far in advance, but like after 2015, like people knew like okay, Roman Reigns is going to be in a featured match like pretty much every
Yes,
single year.
enough
And
it wasn't enough for people to cancel their yearly WrestleMania plans.
yeah, exactly. And then also, during this expansion period post pandemic, like they moved the Royal Rumble and SummerSlam to stadium shows.
Mm-hmm.
Those were
And
not historically stadium shows.
yes, and successfully did do that. I mean, we talked about that last year when we were talking about the the Jey Uso match. Like that to me is his biggest accomplishment as
It's
individual draw. Like is the fact that he got
that
that
is
Uso thing over. Like, and that's
that is
it's not Sami Zayn, who we know is super talented. It's not Cody Rhodes, who we know is super talented. It's not The Rock, who's like the biggest star in the world. It was with Jey Uso.
yep, who we are very much looking forward to his inevitable feud with Pentagon.
It's happening, Adam. You were ahead of that. That is legitimately going to happen.
I'm looking forward to it so much, like not even joking.
Speaking of Cody Rhodes, he's the next guy on this list, and probably like the last really strong candidate I think we're going to discuss in the American region. Um, I think he's got a really strong candidacy. I think because um, he deserves. I don't know if he deserves as much credit for Roman as turning things around, but deserves a lot of it. Is probably fair to say. His jump to WWE really changed things. It changed the perception of what WWE was as a company. It gave them a legitimate babyface star that they had been trying to replace Cena with for years and years. We talked about how Roman underachieved in that role, but Cody really has succeeded. He's remained a valuable and a real asset and draw to WWE. Um, his performances, I think he's not, to me, he is a tier below, or maybe even 2 tiers below, like the absolute best workers and performers in this category. But I think he's still really strong in terms of overall performer. Um, his drawing record is growing and pretty strong at this point too, and you can make a lot of historical significance in terms of did he help contribute to turn WWE around? You can make an argument that he definitely did, and that deserves some historical significance. But perhaps more importantly, he obviously was a pivotal role player, played a pivotal role in AEW getting off the ground and things like that. So to me, he's a really strong candidate. I'll have a hard time not voting for him this year, and certainly in coming years, it seems like he's going to remain a really, really strong candidate and will likely get in.
Yeah, I completely agree. I think he might get in this year,
Yeah.
honestly.
Oh yeah.
Like he's gonna, I mean, I would be surprised if he's not over 50% or at least right around there, but I could easily see him getting in. Like from the drawing standpoint, like yeah, I mean, he definitely helped AEW draw early on. He was also, like we mentioned before, he set him and Omega set ROH's attendance
Yep.
record. They also, before the MSG show, that New Japan's Madison Square Garden show, there him and Omega had that match at the Cow Palace, which set New Japan's US attendance record at the time. So it's not just in WWE. You know, he like they relied on him a lot during the pandemic to, you know, generate ratings and beat NXT in the ratings with all those TNT title matches that he would have every week. So yeah, he's, I mean, I think at this point you kind of have to consider him a Hall of Fame level draw. And then the historical significance of being so critical to starting AEW. Now, I've said before, I don't think he was as critical as the Young Bucks or Omega, or, you know, you can make an argument about Jericho, or you made an argument about Moxley earlier, but the Young Bucks have said All In doesn't happen without him, and All In was essentially AEW's pilot episode. So I mean, you include that plus like the historical significance of this like WWE business expansion post pandemic, which he is absolutely critical for. Like, yes, it did start with Sami Zayn, but look, if Roman wasn't gonna put over Sami Zayn, like who else was there? Like he really saved them by like actually giving them a viable option that the audience was behind, that they also wanted to carry the company forward.
Well,
Uh,
they revolted
After
when
Roman.
he gave up his world title match at Royal Rumble from winning the Royal
Yeah,
Rumble this year.
he was so over the crowd, like turned on the Rock. Like,
Yeah.
that's insane. That's insane.
Um, do you think in hindsight he was like a bigger star in AEW than he was given credit for? And I really think that like creatively in AEW he wasn't used appropriately, and a lot of that might be his own instincts backfiring on him. But AEW didn't get the most out of Cody Rhodes given how prominent he's been in WWE since he returned.
Sometimes it's just time to you need to go somewhere else. And like look at it this way. Like remember we talked about the outsiders a minute ago? Like look at where Hall and Nash were in WWF in
Right.
'96
It wasn't.
versus
Yeah.
how they came off in WCW, like when
Yeah.
they left. Like, you know, it's just sometimes you just need a change of scenery, and that helps a lot. And I do think like if he had turned heel like more formally in AEW, I do think he could have been a big business driver there. But WWE was just so desperate for a baby face, and he just fit that role like a glove. And it's just it was the perfect, he was the perfect guy at the perfect time going to the perfect place. So it was just all like serendipitous, I guess. So I don't think there's anything he could have done in AEW that would have been as successful as what he ended up doing in WWE. Because I mean, he was definitely getting overshadowed by Punk and Bryan, who had just showed up too. So I think
Yeah.
he looked at the lay of the land and was like, all right, I have a better chance for success over there.
Yeah, I mean, I think he probably should have turned heel in AEW and would have done big there because I think the audience would still be invested in what Cody was doing. If they went, maybe there were people that were sick of him as a babyface or whatever. I think like him, losing that match early on, keep him out of the world title picture, hurt him. Like Cody probably should have been a world champion in AEW. Probably would have drawn really well. We'll see. Suit mentioned in the last podcast I did. Suit Williams was on, and he mentioned that the you know, Cody's going to return to AEW one day, which I hadn't really thought about all that much, but obviously has a real opportunity. Like if he's not in the Hall of Fame by that point, uh, he would definitely be solidifying his case because I think that would do huge business if he does return. Trish,
I just have to say with Cody, the neck tattoo is underrated in terms of how negatively that impacted his AEW run.
it's a good point. I mean, we talked about the Anthony Ogogo promo, but that was like a maybe I don't want to think. Maybe this guy isn't actually that cool moment. Um,
Yeah, it didn't
uh,
help. Didn't help.
yeah, Trish Stratus. I don't think we're gonna talk about. Do you have anything to say about Trish Stratus?
Had the best match for her career last year. Jesse
Oh,
definitely
oh,
striking her case.
so you're voting for her this year.
Absolutely not, but just wanted to
Okay.
mention it.
Rick and Scott Steiner, my opinion has not changed on them. They came close last year.
Yeah, I like Rick and Scott a lot as workers, and I definitely think there's a case for them. And I think with modern just kind of being underrepresented in general, but I could definitely see voting for them potentially, but not. I mean, they'd be at like the bottom of the list for
But
people
like,
I'd vote for.
are they really modern? Like they wouldn't really help with the statistics you were talking about earlier, similar like Paul Orndorff. Like
They would a little bit, actually, just because like the even like the '90s are underrepresented. Basically, as soon as the territories died, like those eras, like all the eras after that, don't have as many Hall of Famers as there have been before.
okay, then we have a bunch of first time candidates. Jimmy and Jay Uso, I don't think take them seriously as candidates.
No, I
Yeah.
don't either. Like they have the one, like they never headlined outside of working with Roman. The only
Mhm.
like headline match they have that where Roman isn't involved in the match is that Mania tag match against Owens and Zayn, who were Roman's pay-per-view opponents the previous 2 months.
Yeah.
So it's like outside of him, they're just a mid-card tag team. And yeah, they're like maybe one of the best tag teams in WWE history, but relative to the world, like they pale in comparison to the Bucks, the Briscoes, and a bunch of other teams over the same
Yeah.
era.
Yeah. I mean, especially Jey Uso has had more juice as a singles wrestler than I would have ever predicted. Um, I would say, but I mean, both Jimmy and Jay, their big match singles performances have been like really bad. Like, but in like, I don't, like as tag wrestlers, I never thought like, man, these guys suck. Like these guys, like I always thought like, hey, they're a pretty good working tag team. They've had some good matches over the years. The fact that they're like so ill-equipped for singles matches. I mean, their WrestleMania match, a match that should be a layup, should have been a layup for like how much momentum people felt like it had for it. Never really materialized. Be upset. We're gonna find, Adam, we're gonna find some people that voted for Jimmy and Jay and did not vote for the Young Bucks, and it's gonna be a dark day on the internet for those people. Not me. I'm not gonna attack anyone, but like I think that's gonna be tough. There's gonna be a lot of reactions to people who vote like that. Sid Vicious, he's on this ballot as Sid Vicious. How do you feel about him being on the ballot as Sid Vicious and not any other as other names? I personally think he should just be Sid listed on the ballot, but Dave has him as Sid Vicious.
Yeah, he probably should just be Sid. He doesn't need a last name. Everybody knows who you're talking about when you say Sid within the context of wrestling. Um, yeah, I mean, definitely not a Hall of Fame level worker. Dave rated 2 of his matches above 4 stars for his entire career, which are pretty funny because it's the War Games match where he almost killed Brian Pillman and the 1992 Royal Rumble. So I think that says all you need to know about Sid as a worker. But Sid was always very entertaining. He warrants being on the ballot because he did headline a lot, but he was always headlining in like during down periods in companies, whether it was the WWF or WCW. So they were just kind of turned to him when hey, we're not doing well. We're looking for a spark. Can he be that spark? And he never really could. Not that he was a horrible draw, but he just wasn't like, he couldn't like lift anything up on his own. But if things were going okay, he could do all right. So yeah, Sid's just ballot worthy, but yeah, definitely not someone I'd ever vote for.
For someone that was everywhere in the 1990s, was in big promotions, won world titles, like are there like stuff that not counting meme stuff, like how many iconic Sid moments can you think of like that people that really would jump out to a lot of wrestling fans?
Mm. I
Like
don't know. It's probably
not
like
counting memes.
okay, so not like him saying Kevin Nash was half the man that he was, and Sid had half the brain that he did.
Yes, correct. Not
Yeah.
counting like
So
or him making a face next to Randy Savage, like Sid winning the beating Shawn Michaels at Madison Square Garden. Like he has
that's
that
number one. That's number
the
one.
that or the Royal Rumble where he gives the handshake and pulls Hogan out of the ring. I feel like is fairly
No,
memorable.
Hogan pulled him out of the ring.
Oh, that's
Hogan
right.
was
That's
the
right. Yeah,
heel. Sid
right.
was just wrestling, baby. He just wanted to win the
That
battle
shows
royal.
how memorable it is that I screwed up the roles. But like I mean, for
It's
just a
memorable
guy
to me.
like Sid is like people remember Sid, like hardcore fans remember Sid for him being like squashing guys and being like a great um monster squash guy. But like just for a guy that like on paper did a ton of stuff in big companies and wrestled huge opponents, like he just doesn't have that many like really iconic moments. I mean, I don't think he's a strong candidate anyway, because obviously his work is nothing. His drawing power, as you said, is okay at best. He was a big star in terms of
Mhm.
like getting pushed and winning titles, and people know him. Um, if you saw Sid at the airport, someone that looked like Sid, would you turn around and look at him?
Oh, definitely.
I feel like the airport test is like a really overrated like idea. Like for me, like for like someone to pass the airport test, they'd have to be like Paul White or like the Great Khali. Like they'd have to be like people talk about like I think it was mentioned someone I forget who it was said like Baron Corbin would pass the airport test. I'm like, would he? Like if you just saw Baron Corbin like, wearing like a sweatshirt and jeans at the airport, like would you be like, whoa, who's that guy?
Definitely not. But
No.
Sid would pass the airport test for sure.
If yeah, but even like I don't know, like maybe
Sid
if he
was
was wearing like a muscle tee or something like that. I feel like it's such like a dumb it's such a dumb conversation anyway. But it's like the amount of people who would actually pass the airport test, it'd be like for me it would be like extremely small. Like
Sid would
I
be
would
one of them just because of his height and his hair, and he was also very he did have wide shoulders, but
yeah, I guess
the hair stands out for sure.
yeah, I guess if he was yeah, I guess if it, especially if he was now, like if we just saw something like that now. But I always feel like it's used too liberally, like in terms of like who would pass the airport test. Like most of these people wouldn't. Most people at the airport are in baggy clothing and are trying to walk as quickly away from people and don't want to talk to anyone ever at the airport. Like that's what the airport is like. It's not um like a place where people are really looking for other people. I don't know. Some other candidates, Bray Wyatt. Bray Wyatt obviously passed away. Um, I don't know, one of the worst wrestlers I've ever seen in my entire life. The Fiend is probably my least favorite wrestler ever. And if you just heard me talk about Roman Reigns, that's pretty high. That's pretty impressive that someone I could dislike someone more than Bray Wyatt's Fiend character. Uh, he was creative at introducing characters that might seem interesting, but never followed it up and was a bad wrestler. This is my Bray Wyatt take.
I did a long podcast with Ryan Nietzsche on his Patreon about Bray Wyatt because he goes over all the new candidates
Mhm.
on the ballot every year. So talked at length, kind of recapping his career. And yeah, he's similar to Sid, kind of. Although
Yeah,
I was more entertained by Sid than I was by Bray Wyatt. But
yeah. I mean, Sid was more of a wrestler, like in terms of like a conventional wrestler than Bray Wyatt was. But yeah,
but yeah, very similar careers where like they did a lot of high profile stuff, but like it was very like not a lot of it was good, at least in the traditional sense. I really like the Wyatt family. Thought like that could have really been something
it
great.
was for a while. I was gonna say like the intro. Like I remember watching that for the first time they aired a promo for it, like on Raw, like a vignette, and I was like, these guys are really interesting. They're far more interesting than like a lot of the characters are on WWE at the time. And for a while they were pretty cool. Um, the creative ultimately never went anywhere with them. There was never like we never fully understood the motivations of the characters involved. And since he was such an over the top wacky character, we kind of needed those motivations to understand him more.
Mhm.
I feel like there was a way to take the aesthetic and to take the awesome entrance, and if that was just packaged into a slightly more conventional pro wrestling character, everything would have been fine. But once he started getting powers and things like that, it was over.
Yeah, no, totally agree. I think that was the problem. I do wonder how he would have done with like a more sane version of Vince McMahon, or any other booker who could have like actually given him some long-term direction for like why he had this cult and what they were trying to accomplish in pro wrestling and where they were going and getting
Yeah,
other
and it
members and things
should have
like
been
that.
it should have been easier. Like to me it was, but it was just like, this guy's a cult leader. He wants to win world titles to convince people to join his cult. And like that's should be easy to do, but he had to be a swamp wizard. He had to beat John Cena via singing child. He had to have a projection of himself distract John Moxley in a match. Like it just they couldn't get done. And then the Fiend character was like I don't want to talk about it anymore. Um, Sami Zayn, I do think Sammy is a really interesting candidate. I mean, I would have a hard time, just first glance, hard time voting for Sami Zayn. But I mean,
His case is better. I think Sammy's case is better than people think
it is
initially.
upon first, like I said, the more I think about it, it's like, I mean, look, this guy is one of the best wrestlers of the last 20 years
Yeah,
in
he
ring.
is. He's prolific. Like he has so many incredible. Like he has 21 matches rated over 9 on Cage Match. But like, and it's throughout his career, like
And that
ROH,
he's,
WWE,
I was gonna say,
PWG. Like,
he's someone that probably has a lot of really good matches that aren't rated on Cage Match, like with that many votes too.
mhm. Yeah,
Like he
yeah,
has that I mean, he has a couple of, like, he has a match with Kota Ibushi and DDT, which I absolutely love. He has that Chikara four-way match with, it's him versus Jigsaw versus Nick Jackson, I think. It's one of the Bucks. I'm pretty sure it's Nick versus Kota Ibushi. That is like one of the best indie matches I think of all time. It's only like 15 minutes. It's a four-way elimination match. Him and Kota Ibushi have this sequence that like maybe doesn't look as amazing as it does now in 2024, but when they did it in like 2010 or 2011 or whatever, it was like I watch it like from time to time. It's amazing. Uh, I mean, he's an incredible wrestler. Just on that alone, he deserves serious consideration, I think.
yeah. And then obviously, you can say there's some historical significance to him as well because of like him getting involved with the Bloodline was really what sparked the big business expansion that they had.
Mm-hmm.
So
Well, I would
he
say that
has
would be like his drawing power too. Like he really helped turn things
yeah,
around.
for sure. And I mean, so I mean, it's both really. It that kind of fits both categories. His problem is, I would say, where he has some issues with his candidacy are before that Bloodline program. Like he never headlined in WWE. If he did, it was part of like he was like one of the guys in the Money in the Bank match or
Mm-hmm.
an Elimination Chamber or something like that a couple times. Even from a work standpoint in WWE, like he had like a really great year in NXT. Like when he won that NXT, like I think one of his highest rated matches is the match he had against Pac in NXT where he beat him for the championship.
Yeah.
And like so that was really memorable. But then I
Well, the
remember in
Nakamura
2015.
match.
Yeah, well, that was a couple years later though,
Yeah.
because he got hurt in 2015 and was off for like most of the year. He comes back 2016, has the Nakamura match, has a great feud with Kevin Owens on the main roster. But then after that, he's just kind of like floating around. And like the only real relevant stuff he does is whenever he's either feuding with Kevin Owens or tagging with Kevin Owens. And outside of that, he's just kind of lost on the mid card. He's never someone they really prioritized. And because of that, he wasn't doing as much great stuff as you'd hope. They weren't really making use of his abilities until he connected with the bloodline. So I don't know. He's not going to be someone I vote for this year, but I think as the stronger candidates go in, hopefully over time, and then we see like who else maybe gets added to the ballot. I could eventually decide like what, like he is someone that because modern is underrepresented. I could say what, he does have one of the best careers and is one of the most important wrestlers from this era and warrants induction. But yeah, it just won't be someone I'm voting for this year.
Yeah, I think the difference between him and Owens is I think you can say they're pre WWE careers. are like a draw. I think Owens is probably like a bigger individual star pre WWE. Sami Zayn has better matches pre WWE. Um, but Owens, I think, has far more high moments on like the main roster and in WWE than Zayn does. You could argue that Zayn's peak, the Bloodline thing was higher, but Owens, I think, has been a way more consistent like main event wrestler than Sami Zayn. Had more memorable feuds, all that kind of stuff. To compare the two of them, part of it with Sami is like I like to think like if Sammy was in a company that valued his in-ring work higher than main roster WWE, would he have a lot more like he have a lot more great matches during this WWE run, or is like I think his body being how shot is his body like if he was in AEW for the last 4 or 5 years, would he have a bunch of 4.5 star matches, uh or is that guy, how consistent is that guy? I have questions about his physical state than I do with some other guys where I'm like, oh, if they just weren't in WWE, they'd be having great matches. Sammy, I am worried about. I just don't know if he had, because he wrestled an insane style on the indies, like really insane in terms of the bumps he was taking and things like that. It's no surprise that he slowed down as he entered his 30s, but I do wonder, like, it's a hard hypothetical to answer, like in a way that like isn't that difficult for some other wrestlers, like I don't know, Pac, for example. Like I never doubted that Pac was not still a great wrestler, even when he was in WWE not doing that well, because he physically still looked the part, match part. I'm worried about. I can't say the same for Sami Zayn.
Yeah, no, totally understand. I'll just say, even though I'm not voting for Sammy this year, like if somebody did vote for him, I wouldn't call that a vote.
Yeah.
He's had an incredible career and is just, again, one of the best wrestlers of the modern era.
Mm-hmm. Rich Critch will kill me if this is over 3 hours, so we got to speed through these last guys. So that's it for modern US. New in Japan, we're going to try to do this real quick. First one, Kento Miyahara. I'm strongly considering voting for Kento Miyahara. A lot of it is because I might be a little bit worried he's going to fall off the ballot, and if he falls off the ballot, it might be difficult for him to get back on. I think he's been one of the best pro wrestlers in ring for pretty much his entire career, but certainly for the last decade. I think relative, again, when we talk about drawing, like this is similar to like if he was in New Japan, which is kind of like the WWE of the Japan category. I think his drawing record looks completely different. I think given where he has been in All Japan, he has a very strong drawing case in terms of where that promotion was when he first got started, pushed as a main eventer, and where he was able to do it without a lot of assistance in terms of other like over guys contributing. So I think Kento was a strong candidate. How do you feel about him?
I think it's Kenta. I hate it when people say it's a little bit too soon, but for me, it's a little bit too soon. I just want to see what else he does.
Whoa, whoa, whoa. He's
The
been
next
a
few
main
years.
eventer in All Japan for 6. Do you know how long that's been? No, I know. I understand what you mean.
Yeah, and I think the difference is with him, like it's not just New Japan being bigger than All Japan. Like there's other promotions that were bigger than All Japan too, like as contemporaries as well that did grow. So that's just part of it. So, why I struggle a little bit with him.
Did
So
any
I
were
want
any
to
of
see
those
what more he
promotions
does.
tasked with dragging the corpse of Tsuji Ishikawa and Suwama to great matches?
Probably not. Probably a
Yeah.
lot of them didn't have to like work with Akibono either.
Yeah.
But
Um, but yeah, I think like again when we talk about like this like what do we talk about when we talk about drawing and things like that? I do think like Kento, like because he hasn't worked like a Tokyo Dome show, or he hasn't main evented a Tokyo Dome show or anything like that. Um, he's not considered as like as big of a draw, but I think given like he's done something really difficult, which is like get pushed as the new savior of a really struggling promotion, really deliver for years and years, and also still be around to help put over some other young guys who are coming up that need that credibility. I mean, I think he's had a really, really strong career. Um, Another guy on this list, first time ever, Zack Sabre Jr. I imagine Zack fares pretty well in terms of Observer Awards because of his dominance in the best technical award, and he's probably done pretty well in most outstanding, especially in the last few years. Um, but he's another guy, he's a strong candidate for me because I do think he's been a really great wrestler for a pretty long period of time now. And I don't know how much I value this, but like he's been the best wrestler at a certain style for an extremely long period of time as well. So he's a strong candidate to me, just on work.
Yeah, no, totally agree on that. I don't think I'm not going to vote for him this year, but him winning the IWGP title,
Hmm.
kind of want to see how that run goes. And so I could potentially vote for him as soon as next year, but there's a few candidates. Like I'm big on Shingo, Hayabusa, and Shima.
Hmm.
There is one more vote available in the region, so last minute I could definitely put him or Kento Miyahara down, but yeah, just not quite ready to pull the trigger on either of them.
Yeah, I do think. I mean, to me, there's maybe not like there's not like a super like an Okada or even like a Naito level candidate in Japan, but I do think four is pretty limited. There's some guys I'd like to vote for that I'm not going to get a chance to vote for um, on this one. Tiger Ajit Singh, I guess, is technically new to the Japanese category. He was previously in historical. We've talked about Tiger Ajit Singh before. An interesting candidate in the sense of like as like again something like so the knock on Tiger Jeet Singh is that he was a very, very bad pro wrestler in terms of his work. Could you argue that he was but like if we just discount work and talk about overall wrestling performance in terms of like a heel character that could get heat that people wanted to see a babyface beat, I would argue he probably does a little bit better in that first category if you think about it that way than if you just think about like how good was this guy in the ring, and the answer is not very.
I feel about his in ring work the way you do about Roman Reigns. It's so bad.
It is bad, but I guess my point is I would argue that like he was good at being a pro wrestler.
I don't know. I think a lot of his fame came from like he did a really big angle with Inoki
Yeah, like
early
Inoki
in his
needed an
career,
opponent, right? Yes, kind of
and
like
well,
a.
it also it was a controversial angle too, and I
Mhm.
think that angle got him so much heat that he was able to turn that into a very long term career in Japan. I'll just say like he is a Hall of Fame level draw, and he has longevity as a draw because he's drawn into the 90s in FMW against Onita, like doing these death matches. So yeah, it's if he was just like a normal bad wrestler. Okay, let me put it this way. If he was Bray Wyatt in the ring, I would definitely vote for him. But he's sub Bray Wyatt bad as a wrestler. That's what makes it so hard.
He's offensive to you. Um, is
Yes.
what I'm looking for.
He really is.
Yeah. Um, Takayama is back. He has he been on the ballot before?
He was not for a long time. He was on it back in 2003 and 2005.
Yeah. I mean, Takayama to me, like good presence in the ring. I wouldn't say he's like a great pro wrestler, like in ring wise. Um, worked for some big promotions there's the whole MMA wing. You can make a case that obviously his fight with Don Fry was really memorable. I don't really know, like, doesn't really make him a great fighter because he certainly wasn't. I have a hard time, certainly with 4 votes, it's hard for me to carve out space for Takayama.
Yeah, I'd agree with that. I like if Kojima hasn't gotten a lot of success as a at least
Hmm.
as a solo act, like I would have Kojima ranked far above Takayama. So that makes it a little bit difficult for me. I definitely like him, like a lot of his work. It's hard. Gerard on Voices of Wrestling wrote an article about him as a big fan of his and kind of looked into his drawing case and struggled to make one. So yeah, I don't think he's quite at the Hall of Fame level, but definitely a ballot worthy guy, and it was fun, going back and revisiting some matches in his career when I saw his name come up.
So lastly, we're going to skip over rest of the world and Mexico because neither Adam or I vote in it, and it would be terrible audio because we'd be like, "So Adam, give me your Jose Terrace takes." Anyway, so we're just going to jump to non wrestler. There's 3 people here. Zane Breslov is the first one. Um, Live event promoter, instrumental in a lot of WCW success. Um, I gotta say, I said this last year. I'm gonna say it again. The non wrestler category is a complete mess. I don't know what Dave's doing with it. I don't know how I'm supposed to compare any of these candidates to one another. It's so diverse in what these people were doing. I think it needs to be broken up into 2 or maybe even 3 different categories between like on-screen representation, which would be like managers and TV announcers, Then like behind the scenes business people like Zane Breslov or bookers or trainers or things like that. And then lastly, like people not directly in the industry, like journalists. That's how I would have to break up the non-wrestler category. I think it's just such a mess right now. Um, like Zane Breslov and another guy, Kochi Yoshizawa, who's a journalist, who are both new to this candidate. I'm not voting for either of them, and I think it's like just largely just because like it's impossible to compare these people to other people that are in this category.
Yeah, there's one vote I have available in non-wrestler, and I haven't decided who I'm going to give it to yet.
Oh
It
well,
could
I'll
be
yell
either
at you who it
Zane.
is, who it should be, because I'm gonna get really mad if it's not who I want it to be.
Okay. Well, we can go. I'll tell you who I'm voting for. And which so Ted Turner, definitely voting for Ted Turner. And then Bobby Davis, Grand Wizard, Morris Siegel, Roy Welsh, and Bobby Bruns.
All right,
So there, I think
that's very yes, that's very acceptable to me. I mean, anyone can vote however they want. I don't want to be a jerk about it. I'm really passionate about the Morris Siegel and um, Bobby Davis cases. More Siegel more
oh yeah.
because I'm like more Siegel more because I'm like a lot of people just don't know about him, and I feel like he's a really strong candidate, and I feel like I've kind of discovered things with him. Bobby Davis is like offensive that people haven't voted him yet. Um, uh, but yeah, I have actually the exact same, except I don't have Ted Turner and I have George Scott instead.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. Do you have anything to say about any of these guys, Kevin Sullivan, Koji Yoshizawa, or Zane Breslov?
I don't really see it with Kevin Sullivan. Understanding he was the booker in
Mhm.
WCW for a lot of
Also
this
someone,
period of its
also someone who died.
success. Yes, yep, did unfortunately pass away, but he was also the booker for a lot of WCW's awfulness, and the power structure within WCW was also so confusing that it's tough to know, like, okay, what was he responsible for versus, like other people.
Yeah, like
So
was he responsible? Like, because and again, like the buck has been passed around so much with WCW's demise, and like with various people taking credit for WCW's success, and because the power structure is unclear. Like you're right. Like some people will say Kevin Sullivan was the person who was responsible for Goldberg's streak. Other people will say that he was in charge. He came up with the finish for Goldberg to lose his streak. Like you can literally take basically anything in WCW, plug in some decision maker, whether it's Kevin Sullivan or Terry Taylor or Eric Bischoff or any of these people, Dusty Rhodes, and like you can give them both credit or blame for like any good or bad thing that happened in WCW.
yeah, it's very confusing. Also booked his own divorce, which is always funny to me. I guess it's also tragic in retrospect, but
Yeah,
just pro wrestling's a very weird case.
it sure is. So anyway, let's wrap. Are you still working on your ballot? Like, what's your ballot looking like?
Yeah, so I have that one last non-wrestler vote, and I'm not sure if I'm going to use it or who I'll use it on.
Mhm.
So that's one thing I have to decide. And then my Japanese ballot, I'm definitely voting for Shingo Takagi, Hayabusa, and Shima. It'll be a last minute decision if I use the fourth vote on anybody. In the modern US, I'm definitely voting for the Young Bucks, Paul Orndorff, Roman Reigns, CM Punk, John Moxley, Cody Rhodes, and I think after our discussion, my last vote is going to go to Samoa Joe. And then in historical, British Bulldogs, Johnny Rougeau, Junkyard Dog, the Von Erichs, June Byers, Wild Bull Curry, and Cowboy Bob Ellis.
Yeah, I haven't decided how I want to spread around the historical performers one, but yours sounds probably right. Like, the only one I'm locked in on is Johnny Rougeau. I like the idea of June Byers. I like the idea of Wild Bull Curry. JYD, I've been worn down through different advocacy. Yeah, the modern, I'm actually not really sure. Like, I'm definitely voting for the Young Bucks. I'm definitely voting for Paul Orndorff. I'm probably going to vote for Moxley, and I'm probably going to vote for Cody. After that, I'm not sure. I'll probably vote for Samoa Joe, maybe. And then I could vote for another person in that group, but like I could see myself voting the Briscoes actually.
Yeah.
Because I already said like I'm not really voting for Punk and I'm not voting for Roman. So who else is like really interesting in that category? And I think the Briscoes definitely check that box. Japan, I'm gonna have to really think about it. Japan. Definitely voting for Shingo. Definitely voting for Shima. I voted for them in the past. Um, Kento and Zack Sabre Jr. are looking at me real hard. I also like the Hayabusa case. I really wish I had 5. So it's probably going to come down to two of Hayabusa, Kento, or Zack Sabre Jr. Um, I could kind of vote for Tiger Jeet Singh too, but probably not. I mean,
Yeah,
he's not
no,
getting my 4.
nobody feels good about voting for Tiger Jeet Singh.
Well,
I
certainly
think
not with
Gerard.
4.
Yeah, I think
Honestly,
Gerard's the only person who loves
if
Tiger.
if he was back in U.S. historical, I'd probably vote for him because I kind of have the votes to spread around there. And 4, it's real tough with guys who I know are like legitimately amazing pro wrestlers. Like that's it's hard to get to the it's like Shima or Tiger Jeet Singh, Kento Miyahara or Tiger Jeet Singh. And like it just feels wrong, even though he was a big draw. You're right about that. We got to wrap this up because Rich is big on not there being a 3-hour limit to these things, and God forbid a show
Understood.
goes over 3 hours on Voice of Wrestling Network. That never happens. But Adam, do you have anything you want to plug? I know you say you have an article that you're going to finally get off your ass and finish.
Yeah, so I'll definitely it'll be before the end of Hall of Fame season, hopefully within the next week or so. Definitely have a Hall of Fame article, taking a bit of a macro look at it, as we mentioned before. But yeah, and then I'll definitely post my ballot once I finalize it as well.
All right, excellent. I want to thank Adam again for joining the show once again. I hope people like this. There's a ton of Hall of Fame content coming at you from all directions. So I'm always grateful for anyone that considers our opinions valuable enough to listen to them for 3 hours. Thanks a lot, and talk to you again after a while. Bye bye.